Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Logical, Plausible, Probable. I'm your host, John Maddox, and tonight we're having another stream you just won't want to miss. If you got what it takes, click that link, but prepare yourself, for this arena is not for the weak. Now, let the mental combat begin, but always make sure your arguments are LPP.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to what should be an interesting stream tonight as Otangelo and I review an interesting interaction that he had this past Friday with Vino and MD Aware over on the Truth Wanted show. Yet another product of the atheist community of Austin, and yet another example of how the just staggering regurgitation of the same talking points from the Austin-centered atheists just doesn't even come close to actual reality nor scientifically established principles that have been around for a very long time. So I'm going to attempt to be relatively diplomatic because moments ago, MD Aware emailed Otangelo and said that he and Vino are potentially open to a debate between he and I. So we will see what comes of that. So I will attempt to be not too mean this evening, and hopefully we can maintain a little bit of diplomacy, even though they had the challenge had been made quite a while ago. they didn't respond, so on and so forth. But we'll see what happens. Hopefully something will come of it, and or maybe they'll watch this and realize that we'll obliterate them and won't actually accept. But all that to say, before we get going, I just want to say what's up to so many friendly faces and frequent visitors to the channel. We got Super Redeemed Energy, Redefined Living's in the house, Ray is in here. I think I saw that Andrew just hit 4 months as a member. Really appreciate that, Andrew Kaufman. Thank you so much for your membership and for support of the channel, all the super chats you guys do. I think Rita Fine tossed in the super chat. Appreciate you very much. Utopia Buster's here. Shelly's here. One and only Standing for Truth is in the house. Man, we got all sorts of folks. So this should be a good one. And obviously, Otangelo is joining me. What's up, man? How you doing? Welcome to the stream. How's your evening going? And how did you feel about your, I guess this was your second interaction with MD Aware. I think you probably your first with Vino, right?
Yes, hello, John. Hello, everyone. Yes, I called in last Friday upon a sudden email from him after about 3 months. I think my call in at Talk Heathens was in October last year, and then I didn't hear from him anymore. And then he emailed me and invited me to call in, and I said, sure, why not? So I called in, and we had this interaction. And well, I think they are very polite, very educated. What I didn't like is that I was muted while I was talking at every opportunity, and they talked for about 5-10 minutes, and then I had just made one sentence or so, and then they interrupted me, muted me, and then they talked again for about 10 minutes. So they didn't give me the opportunity to actually make my case. And I think that is not a good way to have a good debate where both sides have the same time. I mean, the caller is also in disadvantage because he is one person and the host, they are two guys. So that is already a disadvantage. And that happened about 3 or 4 times. And then I said, hey, MD, I would like to have the time to actually reply to the things that you guys are saying. So this is a critique which I think I've seen it on other opportunities. They really like that mute button, which gives them an advantage. And I think they overuse it. I mean, there are some interlocutors which maybe are cutting them off or something like that. Then I think it is okay to use it. But how they did it with me, I think that wasn't okay. And I was able to bring through a little bit, but not what I actually wanted. So that's why I wrote him after the show and said, well, if you want to have a debate, I'm open for that. And so tonight he responded. And yeah, I hope that, I am always interested, and I think they are as well, to have a positive interaction, which is that we talk about the topics and the evidence and where it leads to, and don't lower the attack of the persons. So I think this is something that I have been slippery. I have made my mistakes, and I recognize that, and I'll try to do better. So, and I hope that all the other side that can happen as well. Yeah, and I mean, in regards of the topic, we will have a watch at the video at the call in, and then we can comment on it.
Absolutely. So yeah, your point about the muting and the 2-on-1 thing. Hey, people know that going into it, but you're right. The cutting off, the muting, and not actually allowing people to. The trend I've noticed with pretty much all of the ACA shows is they don't allow full development of an argument before they interrupt, and then start the dismissal process.
Yeah, and last time when this happened, John, sorry to interrupt you, was when I called in at the line when Matt Dillahunty was hosting with Jim Snow, and it was about the Shroud of Turin, and he really got me off because he was just interrupting me much worse than the two interlocutors last Friday, and he simply doesn't permit the interlocutor to talk. He doesn't listen. He constantly interrupts, but he doesn't like to be interrupted. And that got me so angry that I said, listen, this is dishonest, that tactic that you are using. I was referring to his tactic, not necessarily due to what he was saying, but the way he was interlocuting with me, just interrupting me and not permitting me to make my case. And that is a tactic that they use. And I think this doesn't permit to have good interactions.
Well, I definitely agree with that. And I think the other aspect of it is by the easy cutoffs and dismissals they give, they misrepresent arguments very often to the audience as somehow they've been completely debunked. When the irony for me, especially with all the what's the definition of the standard tactic they use? The irony is that they themselves, when they respond with the definition, very often, especially things like the information argument, codes, etc., they clearly don't understand what they're saying, while claiming that the other person,
they don't understand it, John. And worse than that, the audience doesn't understand it either. And they simply believe what the hosts say without actually understanding if what they say is true or not. So they have an easy play because none of these guys actually understands biology.
Well, and that's what the first thing we're going to get into, folks. So we're about to start playing this video, and I want to start this off. So the atheists who won't actually ever watch the entire arguments that are made, nor will they go and actually read the papers from which the positions are drawn. I don't want to give them any excuse to claim that I didn't present the two individuals on screen in the best light. So Vino, the guy on the left, is we're about to hear, he claims to have a degree in biology as well as to currently be an engineer with a startup. And MD Aware claims to be a surgeon, so he's an MD already, and to be working on a PhD in genetics. So we're talking about two people who theoretically should not showcase astonishing levels of either ignorance or misrepresentation. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Either these guys are ignorant or they're deliberately misrepresenting their own knowledge. There's no in between at this point, especially when you say you have a degree in biology and you're a doctor working on a PhD. You're an MD working on a PhD, and then the levels of ignorance. So again, I'm going to try and be relatively nice tonight, but it's truly astounding to me the things that are said by these guys. But without further ado, let's let Vino introduce himself so nobody can say that I misrepresented his own representation of himself.
Why don't you tell us who you are and what the deal is with your name?
Yeah, so I can't tell you too much because due to the inextricable link that you and I have to one another, I've decided to maintain my anonymity to at least some extent. But I guess we spent a lot of our formative atheist and skeptical time together. In our university experience, we debated publicly, we formed a club, we sharpened our wits against one another. Spent this is we grew up together, so to speak, in this world, and we've stayed debating this whole time. And we also, of course, hosted a podcast and radio show about science, skepticism, and trivia, the name of which I will not divulge. The long since defunct, still on my hard drive somewhere show. But yeah, I worked as a biologist. I have a biology degree, very much like you, but not as far as you. And now I work in the startup space in engineering. My name, it was sort of, I guess, in a bolt of inspiration by both being asked by you and both being I guess several sheets to the wind, as you might call it. I thought that the name of the show warranted an old Latin saying, "In vino veritas." So in wine there is truth. So I went with Vino.
Fantastic. All right.
Okay, so now that we've got the little introduction out of the way, give them their chance to put forth credentials and such. And for those of you who haven't seen my previous review of MD Aware, I did the exact same thing for him, where he talks specifically about his background. And further on in this discussion with Otangelo on the phone call, he kind of also alludes both to being a surgeon as well as working in research labs, specifically, I believe, in plant genetics. So there's no again, no misrepresentation. And hopefully, as I say all the time, atheists will actually go and try to back up their BS, not claim that we never made an argument. Okay, so here we go, folks. Let us play. And before we start, Angela, you got anything you want to say before we start the call?
No, go ahead.
All right.
Why don't we go to an old I don't know, not nemesis, sparring partner of the show.
Sparring partner.
Longtime caller, Otangelo in Brazil. Otangelo, what do you got for us today?
Yes, hello guys. Yes,
Yeah,
hello,
Angelo.
MD Aware. Hi, Vino.
Hello.
So yes, I saw your show on Talk Heathen with Katie. There was a caller who called in and talked about the origin of information contained in DNA. And your answer was basically that the DNA is just a chemical, it's just chemical reactions, it's just a chemical molecule, right?
Yeah, from a physical perspective, yeah.
Okay, but the caller, he was calling in wanting to talk about the information contained in DNA. And that would be evidence of God, which would be the injector of that information. And then that call went a little bit astray, so maybe we can come back to that topic, which I think is a topic which has been much debated between theists and atheists. It is a very interesting.
What do you think, Otangelo?
Well, I think that instruction.
All right. So one point that kind of sticks out to me at the beginning there, when you're talking about what it is, he kind of makes a distinction. Well, yes, the physical aspect of it, right?
That
in
was
relation
in that
to
call, which I referenced in October. There was a caller which called in with that argument about the origin of the genetic information. And he immediately said, well, it's just a chemical, right? It is just a chemical reactions. And of course, there are chemical reactions. And of course, DNA is a chemical molecule. But that's not what we are talking about. And I think it is common knowledge that DNA stores information which is instructional. It directs the making of proteins, and also it directs the operation of cellular life. So
to your point about fundamental, the central dogma literally is what you just described. That is the central dogma.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So it has been the central dogma for quite some time. This is why I have kind of wanted to start this whole conversation off with the fact that we have, on the left, we have a biology graduate. On the right, we have a doctor and a PhD researcher in genetics. So what the central dogma is, these two gentlemen on my screen have no excuse to not know, at a minimum, what the central dogma is. But let's continue.
Assembly information like a blueprint or an AutoCAD drawing, which instructs to make a machine or a factory or a computer or a turbine or a neuron or whatever, requires intelligence. So that is basically my conclusion. That's what we precisely see in DNA, where we have information stored to make these things on a molecular scale. And I would like to know how you see this.
And Angelo, for the audience, I want to point out one more thing, a clear distinction you just made, which very often gets glossed over or ignored or misinterpreted by a lot of atheists. You specifically stated the information stored in the DNA. You didn't say that the DNA itself necessarily is the information, only rather that it could be stored inside of it. And
yeah, this is often confused when they say, "Oh, the DNA isn't the code." And I've seen you also making several times this affirmation, and I think we need to be careful and outline what we are saying actually. So DNA is a physical chemical molecule, of course, but a good analogy is the hard disk and software stored in the hard disk of the computer. Of course, the hard disk isn't the code or the information, but what is stored in the hard disk is the information, which is the software, which can be a book, a movie, or a blueprint, or whatever. Okay, so this is basic, and we need to outline this, that DNA is the information carrier. It is the physical device, the chemical device, and then the sequence of the nucleotides, they convey the information, the specified complex sequence. And it is the same as a language where you write a word. That word has meaning. And we will see that later in the call, where I call codons words, and they tried to dispute that. But this is what effectively it is. Codons, they are 3 nucleotides, and they have meaning. They bear meaning. They are assigned to amino acids. They mean stop, they mean start, so they have meaning. And of course, that is the big question mark. Where does that meaning come from, that assignment? And secondly, which is what many also don't understand, after that, we also have to explain the sequence of these nucleotides or the codons, which then direct the making of the amino acids.
Exactly. And I'm gonna pull up some papers on that exact topic as we get further into this, and that just to back up the points you were making and how bluntly these guys end up just directly contradicting what is well accepted in academia. So let's continue.
So, Angela, this is sort of this is tricky because when we look at seemingly precisely sequenced things, we generally try to attribute some intelligence to that, right? Like when we say the word information, we invoke like a representation or a representation of somebody giving that information and somebody receiving that information. But you can use physical examples to sort of draw conclusions on how something like DNA could exist without having somebody perpetrate it.
Okay, I get really, really annoyed with this whole. We think that information is just two conscious agents talking to each other, and information doesn't exist unless there's like two intelligent agents transmitting it.
Yes,
I mean,
I've seen this claim. I've seen that too.
This is such a standard claim, and it just showcases staggering ignorance of the points that are being made.
And the other, John, is when they are saying, well, but we are just describing what we see in DNA. And of course, yes, science has discovered what DNA is and what it does. But on top of that, it is not just about what we describe, which is information, but what DNA does. It stores instructional assembly information to make things, analogously to what we do when we sit on a drawing table and draw and design a blueprint which instructs to make a machine, which is precisely the argument which I presented to them.
Right, and in relation to the information aspect of it, it's like what's being transmitted between the two parties, whether conscious or unconscious, that is the information.
Right, exactly. It is instructional, prescribed information. It is not just described as we are describing something we should observe, but it prescribes how things have to work.
Absolutely. And just out of fun, I'm going to quickly read what digital data is. So digital data in information theory and information systems is information represented as a string of discrete symbols, each of which can take on one of only a finite number of values from some alphabet, such as letters or digits. An example is a text document, which consists of a string of alphanumeric characters, right? So we'll get further into the whole point of why that is relevant. But to the point you made about the symbolic representations, that is what the genetic code is. It's symbolic representations. There's source and target alphabets. You have the proteome, you have the genome to the proteome. Like, this is well-established concepts that have been around for a long time. And, all the way going back to 1953, I think. Not Watson and Crick, but I forget drawing a blank on the guy who actually cracked the code itself. But I think he did in 53. But anyway,
yeah, it was Nuremberg in, I think, in 61 or 60 in the 60s. They cracked the code. But another very common misunderstanding, John, is when people hear about genetic code, they think it is actually the sequence which bears the information. And it's not the sequence which bears the information. It is the translation, it is the assignment of the codons to the amino acids. So we are talking here about two origins questions. One is the question, how was the genetic code set up, which is that assignment? And then on top of that, how was that language used to construct or to instantiate the information, the sequence of nucleotides, which then are used to make the proteins or to operate the cell.
Absolutely. And that code mapping that you're referring to is a fundamental component and concept in information theory and communication systems. Like, this has been around for a long time. And anyway, not going a long way to diatribe about this, but we can see from the very beginning, within the first 30 seconds of the response, that we already have a false foundation to the supposed rebuttal. let's continue.
For instance, if you look at the sequence of the planets in the solar system, a meteor passing through that will always, will follow a certain path, presuming it enters at a certain place every time, right? Because those planets, if arranged identically, convey some path of the gravitational field.
I mean, I didn't want, of course, to actually, I tried to interrupt, but I was muted. But when I hear this, I was thinking to myself, well, we are not talking here about planet systems or stars or things like that. We are talking here about the genetic code and information. So why is he moving to a completely different topic?
Well, and here's the thing, though, Motangelo, is he's clearly either doesn't know or is misrepresenting analog versus digital as well. Nobody is going to say that the comet coming through or the meteor coming through the solar system is digital data. Now, now the representation we might see from radar or from imaging, that could be a digital representation of that meteor. But the meteor itself, in the path that it takes, is not digital in and of it's not digital information in and of itself.
Exactly.
Which is part of the reason I just read what is the definition of digital data, right? Because to start this from the foundational position of, hey guys, you're operating from a completely false starting point. And I'm going to pull up some other stuff here in a second. Let's let him finish his point here.
The same thing happens in chemicals. DNA is one of them, but even simpler chemical reactions, their structure, their atomic arrangement, everything, it dictates the speed of the chemical reaction. It dictates how much of a product comes through, how quickly it degenerates, all of those things. And that could be also seen as information, but we don't necessarily need to attribute some character, some agent behind that information. We simply need to understand that some things are physical and some things that are physical lead to distinct and predictable outcomes.
Right. Yeah. So I think the biggest.
Okay, so he's talking about outcomes, not the cause, and not the information that controls the execution of those processes he just referred to.
Well, if I'm not wrong, John, it seems to me that he tried precisely to do what I described previously, to attribute to the system just a description and not that it prescribes how things have to work.
Yes, he did. And real quick, we're going to drop them off and let's pull up a quick. So I'm going to share something else. And just so that nobody can claim there's not established principles on this, I'm going to pull up this is actually from a book from the Cambridge Press, but this one about is also in a peer-reviewed paper as well. I'm about to pull up here. Let's see. Okay, how's my screen doing here? Let's see. All right, so this is from Hubert Yockey's Information Theory, Evolution, and the Origin of Life. All right, so following Gamov, it is essential to make a clear distinction between the sequences of nucleotides, which you were referring to earlier, a minute ago, Otangelo, in the genome, and the code between the mRNA alphabet and the amino acid alphabet.
Yeah,
the proteome, in analogy to the genome, is a collection of amino acids that form protein. To do so, we must use a basic idea in probability theory, the sample space. See the discussion of probability in the mathematical appendix. So definition, the set of all elementary events, A, in sample space, blah, blah, to each with probabilities P sub I have been assigned, is called a probability sample space of elementary events, or simply a sample space. The elements A are called random variables. The set of probabilities P sub I form a probability vector P. The probability sample space is designated. Okay. Then he goes into much more description. Then, okay, the genetic code has many other properties of codes in general, specifically the Morse code, the universal product barcode, or ASCII. ASCII, used in computer equipment, and the U.S. Postal Code. I shall explain the relation of these codes to the genetic code in the following discussion. Every code, as the term is used in this book, can be regarded as a channel with an input alphabet A and an output alphabet B. Here is the formal definition of code. Given a source with probability space and a receiver with probability space, and it's like getting into the distinctions, then a unique mapping of the letters of alphabet A on the letters of alphabet B is called a code. Okay, so you have, and there's a shorter version of it. It's code equals S to T. So
right,
the S
right.
to T is the
Can I give a stop here?
yeah.
So this is a very relevant point, John, which you are outlining here. And the question which I always ask to atheists is this: why would mindless molecules make a meaning assignment? Meaning assignment is something which only intelligence does. Molecules, they don't have the aim or the goal to establish a translation system or a code system or a cipher system. These are mindless molecules. And I think this should be pretty clear. And when they try to introduce evolution into the picture, then they are forgetting that we are talking here about an abiogenesis problem, because the genetic code had to be established when life started with self-replication. So they cannot invoke evolution. Either it was intelligence which was involved or not. That's it.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely correct, and that's part of the whole aspect of why I think many of them want to dodge the question or act like it's not something that actually needs to be answered. Because if they do, and it's like kind of funny, even different folks I've debated with, they'll have even conceded that, oh, well, if it is actually a digital code, if it actually is all these properties, then yes, it would be evidence for an intelligent agent. But it's just an analogy, it's just a metaphor. Therefore, I don't have to actually concede that it's evidence in favor of an intelligent agent.
And they say that because they don't understand what they're talking about.
Very true. And it's going to be continued to be that's going to be showcased even more here as we continue. So let's keep going on.
The biggest issue that I take is that when you call DNA information, you're smuggling in the assumption, like Vino suggested, that there is someone creating that information. And I don't think that that's warranted. So I think that one way, I think it says a lot about how we as scientists and humans understand DNA. We interpret it as information, as a code. We break it down into genes that, each do individual things, but it's really a working backwards situation, right? If you were just to look at a strand of DNA out of context, you wouldn't be able to tell where one gene ended and another one began, right? We only get that because of the way the body processes things. And so I think the issue with calling DNA information is because you're smuggling in those assumptions.
Give a stop here. So here he is repeating here point by point what atheists claim for decades, right? And
yeah, absolutely. And we're continue. I'm about to pull up a paper and we're just going to obliterate that stupid talking point. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, he tries again to say that we are just describing what we see, but that there is not a code in operation, which is simply not true.
Well, as you know, Tangelo, the information deal just drives me up the freaking wall that I'm even having to argue this stuff. It's like, okay, so case in point, and again, this is for all the atheists out there who claim that I never show sources, yada, yada, yada. There's not access. Go to the about page of this channel, click the link that says for the annoying people, and you can go look at all these papers. Okay, so again, for the guys who have MDs, bachelor's degrees in biology, working on PhDs in genetics, I really think that you should go and take up your It's Not Actually Information with people like Jack Shostak, who is a Nobel Prize winner and published this paper a couple years ago. And this one specifically is about not just random information or any kind of information or Shannon information, but actually functional information and what must be accounted for in its how it can be mathematically quantified, as well as like what are the different factors that have to be in place for it. How does this represent itself? What's the representation in biological systems? How do you measure it, et cetera, et cetera.
Can you quick stop here? Well, I think this is very important, and it's good that you brought that paper up, John, because it says functional information. And traditionally the ID proponents, they described it as complex specified information. And that has many people, they have had difficulties to understand, well, what does that mean, complex specified information? And that has caused a lot of confusion. But when you say as instructional assembly information, I think it describes what is going on much better, in a much more clear sense that a layman can understand. And that's why I like as well the analogy to a blueprint. And when you imagine a machine designer, that's my profession, I need to sit on the drawing table and then I need to figure out how can I draw a machine and make that blueprint, which then goes to the factory, and the factory workers, they can read that blueprint, and based on these instructions, they can make the physical device. That is precisely where we have the digital information, which is the blueprint, transformed into the analog device, which is the 3D thing, which is equivalent to the digital information. So that relationship, how could that have emerged prebiotically without intelligence? And I think atheists, they just gloss over this and don't actually really try to understand what we are talking about, because these are things which we only know of intelligent beings being able to instantiate. And chance or random unguided events, they can't. They have no goals. They don't make machines. They don't make instructional assembly information. They don't make blueprints.
No, you're absolutely right. And again, folks, just listen to the words that are coming out of the atheist's mouth, and then what we're showing. And by the way, the papers that I show and I reference are written by mostly atheists, but they're at well-established, great H-index ratings from an academic perspective, and this is their specialties. And they may disagree with me from an ontological perspective, and Angelo as well, in terms of the origin,
Right.
but not what the whole point of this is, which is this is something you must account for. You can't just say it doesn't exist, which is what we hear ad nauseum from so many of the atheists. Let's continue.
When I don't think they're warranted. And so if you're trying to use DNA to prove the existence of an information giver, I think you've put the cart before the horse.
Okay, DNA is actually a semantophoretic molecule, which is like the hardware, but the sequence of nucleotides, those are the ones which is the actual information. So that sequence dictates the making of proteins, for example, or how to operate the cell. And that sequence...
Would you call it information? Angela, would you call it information if there were no humans?
What? I don't understand your question. What do you mean?
No humans to interpret the idea. Like if we couldn't study DNA and it was just a molecule floating around or just by amoebas, then we wouldn't obviously refer to it as information, right? It was just a physical happenstance.
Well, the thing is that...
You know, I really can't tell with Vino, because it gets worse as it goes along, but I really can't tell if he is just so arrogant that he doesn't realize the level of condescension. Because later on in this, he asks you if you even understand what evolution is, in a very condescending way. And it's hysterical to me, because it's like these guys are acting like basic fundamentals of biology don't exist. And information theory.
Let's just say I would give Vino a blueprint to make, or an architecture blueprint to make a house, and just show it to him, and then asking him, there are no agents around, nothing like that, but he looks just at the blueprint. Is that an instructional assembly information? Yes or no? Of course it is. And that's exactly analogous to what we see in DNA.
Yep. It's I just don't get it. I don't get it. This is so well established. These concepts are so well established. It amazes me. Actually, real quick before we continue, I'm going to pull this up real quick, and I'm just going to read this real quick. It's one of my favorite papers.
Yeah, he is very good.
Okay, so again, folks, this let me go back. I may have a. Let's see. This is the paper itself. Okay, so anybody, again, atheists who claim I don't show the sources, there it is. And then you guys always claim we quote mine. So prepare yourselves. I'm about to read a lot. Okay, so you can't claim I take things out of context. All right, let's go. We must face the problem of the reality of the organic codes. Are they real codes? Do they actually exist in living systems? It is a fact that the genetic code has been universally accepted into modern biology. But let us not be naive about this. What has been accepted is the name of the genetic code, not its ontological reality. More precisely, the genetic code has been accepted under the assumption that its rules were determined by chemistry and do not have the arbitrariness that is essential in any real code. The theoretical premise of this assumption is the belief that there cannot be arbitrary rules in nature, and this inevitably implies that the genetic code is a metaphorical entity, not a real code. This idea has a long history, and let us not forget that for many decades it has been the dominant view in molecular biology. The first model of the genetic code was the Stereochemical Theory, an idea proposed by George Gamow in 1954. Oh, I was right. I was close. I said 53. And later reproposed by many other authors, which states that the relationship between codons and amino acids were the result of stereochemical affinities. The second canonical model was the coevolution theory proposed by Wong, according to which the genetic code co-evolved with the biochemical pathways that introduced new amino acids in protein synthesis. Both theories imply that the rules of the genetic code are chemically determined and no arbitrariness exists in them. It has taken a long time and much experimental work to overturn this conclusion, but eventually it has been shown that there is no deterministic link between codons and amino acids because any codon can be associated with any amino acid. Bunch of references there, by the way, folks. This means that the rules of the genetic code do not descend from chemical necessity, and in this sense, they are arbitrary. Today, in other words, we have the experimental evidence that the genetic code is a real code, a code that is compatible with the laws of physics and chemistry, but is not dictated by them. Our problem, therefore, is to take stock of this reality and to account for it. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have atheists who are claiming that this stuff doesn't exist, right? And the reality is, it's not only does it exist, but it's also been tons and tons of research that's proven beyond all doubt that you do have to account for the fact that it actually is real code. There is real information. It is digital information, and it follows all the same principles of information communication theory that our systems do. So you can't just say it doesn't exist. Like, it is established that it exists. So anyway, with my diatribe,
yes, and for those which still don't understand what we are talking about, I like to make analogies because that makes it easier for any layperson which doesn't study these things to understand what we are talking about. And the analogy is like a translation book, where, for example, you want to translate the word chair in English to the Chinese equivalent word, which means the same, the physical structure of 4 legs and so forth, in Chinese, which would be shizi. So there is the equivalence of the word chair in English to shizi in Chinese. That is the translation. And only intelligence makes these assignments. Molecules without intelligence don't make this kind of assignments. They don't create codes and languages and translation books.
Well, in line with what you were saying there with chair, right? So you actually have multiple alphabets in play. You have the sound aspects, and the values have been assigned to the sounds, right, in relation to the letters in English, and the coordination of all those letters and those sounds, which could be, and then the chair, the value of chair has been assigned to them in the code mapping. Right. And then in Chinese, you have both a symbol that represents chair. I assume there's some symbol in Chinese that means chair, right? As well as, was it shizi? I forget what you said, but
shizi. Yeah.
But there's also been sound that's been assigned to equal chair in Chinese, right? So there's all these different value assignments that have to be accounted for that are the points that you're making in terms of what is the necessity for the arbitrary value assignment of sounds and pressures versus symbols on whether it be written on paper, seen on a screen, carved out of wood, carved out of wax, whatever the medium is, has zero relevance to how the values were actually assigned to those symbolic representations of whatever the object is.
Yeah, and the further important point, John, non-intelligent agents, they don't have goals or foresight. We as intelligent beings, we might have, for example, a company in England and the factory in China. And there is a necessity maybe of communication So in order for me as an Englishman to be able to communicate with the people in the factory in China, I need to have that translation book. So there is a goal to be achieved to establish that communication. Okay. And the same is in biology, where we have a goal, which is to make molecular machines, which are the proteins, which are the working horses in the cell. And in order to do so, there has to be that translation machinery where we have the information stored in the cell, which then also is replicated in order to keep that information stored in the next generation, and then to use that information to make actually something which has purpose, which has function. So molecules, they don't have goals, they don't have foresight, they don't have will to instantiate machines and factories and to self-replicate and to complexify.
Well, and the irony is, in relation to like self-replication, is the information necessity for self-replication is greater than what is being replicated. So
yes,
it's that is such a fundamental concept in information theory that, like, the fact that this gets overlooked or just dismissed, or like, it gets me every time. But let's continue. Because we're getting to the good stuff.
Well, what science has discovered since the 50s from the last century, that DNA is a molecule which stores a very specific sequence of nucleotides. And that sequence dictates the sequence of polymer amino acids. And that sequence is actually which then confers the 3D form of proteins.
Yeah.
And that
you know how biology works.
Is a very specific. Okay, so that sequence is specified and complex in the sense that you cannot put any sequence into an.
So real quick, the fact that he just said, dismissed to a point you're making and said, we understand how biology works, with their smirks. And then what he's about to say, following up, again, goes back to my earlier point at the beginning of all this, is either they're misrepresenting things on purpose in order to, convince their audience that all this stuff is meaningless, or something is seriously wrong with our education system. I mean, I don't really know what else to say, because what's about to come out is epic.
Amino acid chain, and then have the right folding and the functional protein. So in sequence
phase, if I take a deck of cards and I shuffle it, the sequence of cards is specific, it's very specific, and it's unique, right? Does that mean that is information in the same context?
Okay. Oh, dude. Okay. MD Aware, bro, please never use that one ever again. It's quite possibly one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. I'm trying to be calm. I know it's supposed to be nice, Otangelo, but bro, you can have a deck of cards and you can play a whole crapload of different games with that set of cards. Until you've determined which game you're playing, the sequence of the cards has no relevance other than the number that's on them. Okay, like there's going to be different representations in poker versus spades versus pinochle versus go fish. Like, around go fish is the baseline numbers. Never mind. But like all these, the rules of the game have relevance to what the meaning of the cards are in a specific sequence, which is the whole point you were making about the information in the DNA. Like, dude, yeah, I can have all the DNA is like the entire pack, bro. And then you've got the then you have nucleotides inside. But then until you've assigned like 3 of a kind plus 2 of a kind equals full house, or 5 in a row equals a straight, or 5 of a certain suit equals a flush, 5 in a row plus same suit equals straight flush. I mean, like, until you have made those value assignments, it doesn't matter. And it can switch. Like, dude, this is not that complicated. This is like so basic. I'm just, it gets me every time when I hear these kind of points. What I say, do you understand what I was saying there, Angela? Did it make sense, or am I like losing my mind here?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to come to a different point through my answer. You can continue and then you see.
No, because what you actually need is a specific sequence which then bears function. You cannot have just any kind of sequence of amino acids and then have a functional protein. You need a very specific sequence in order to have.
I kind of agree with you, but the difference is that you don't actually need it to be that specific. You need it to be specific to a certain degree. But what we see throughout evolutionary biology, through biology, even if you take the evolution part out of it, is that everything in biology is just sort of good enough. You know, it's not optimized. It doesn't work the best. We humans only function, like our enzymes are only function.
I mean, he makes here an enormous straw man, John. Enormous straw man. And I was thinking about what he just said. And he was to diminish the engineering which is required in the cell to actually have it working properly. We have error check and repair mechanisms which control the entire process, starting from DNA to the translation in the ribosome. The ribosome has 13 error check and repair mechanisms. So we are not talking here about just good enough. We are talking here about the most sophisticated engineering that man is unable to replicate or to instantiate. And he wants to make it look like it is something, like it's not a feat or something special. Yes, it is. If you look and study the ribosome, then you have the most complex translation machine and 3D printer that we know of. So,
well, and here's the other thing, Otangelo, is what they're trying to do here is to deflect away from the information argument itself. Now they're trying to go to, oh, well, like it's not only are we not admitting that it's information, it also sucks. It's not that good. It's bad. And to your point, like shift over to, oh, it's horrible engineering and all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, well, whether that's true or false, which obviously we could just obliterate that talking point, but whether that's true or false has nothing to do with whether or not you have to account for the information problem. Like that is it's a non sequitur, right?
Yeah, sure.
And it just, it gets me. But ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to hear might possibly be the stupidest thing that comes out of these two's mouth in this entire conversation. Just prepare yourselves for what. Just pay close attention, because right after this next sentence, couple sentences, is hysterical. Let's continue.
In a very narrow range of temperatures, which is why if you go below like 35 degrees core body temperature or above like 40 degrees Celsius, this is core body temperature, then you're in real trouble, right? And that's a really narrow thing. And that's because our enzymes that run our metabolic processes don't really function that well. They're not optimized.
Our eyes are a disaster. Our birthing process is basically unacceptable.
Yep. We have like I regularly take out organs that people are born with and regularly try to kill them just because they felt inflammatory that day.
Okay, so first off, the first sentence out of our plus play again was him talking about how enzymes don't function except in a very specific range of temperatures. Okay, so number one, dude, that has nothing to do with the information problem. Number one. Number two, let's make a sentence out of freaking wax letters and then stick it outside in the sun. Does the fact that it will melt have anything to do with what information was initially required for said sentence made out of wax letters to exist? Obviously not. So I hope, MD Aware, that you will please concede that that is just dumb statement, number one. Number two, we have all sorts of things that we create that are machine components that also only operate efficiently in a specific range of temperatures. So, sir, are you going to argue that because if we drop something in a molten furnace and it melts, that somehow there was no engineering required on the front end for it to exist? I don't think that you would ever say that about anything else. How then can you have a freaking MD and be getting a PhD in genetics and come to the same conclusion about nanotechnology in the human body or in any organism? Moreover, in the multi-billion-dollar, largest, fastest-growing industry segment on the freaking planet, which is biotech, in which we are creating custom functions and custom sequencing out of the same stuff, are you suggesting that all the genius brain power that's going into those projects, because that will stop working if you get outside the range of temperatures, that somehow that is crap? and that is not indicative and evidentiary in favor of the necessity of intelligent agents for that crap to exist. Because I don't know what world you live in, MD Aware, and I have to calm myself. Go ahead, Artangelo. I got to calm myself down because I'm not being diplomatic, and we want to have this debate. So I'm going to calm down. Go ahead, Artangelo. You have anything you want to say on my rant there?
Yeah, I mean, another aspect, which is that life has a very sophisticated signaling mechanisms to adapt to the environment, and we have heat shock proteins, and when it's cold outside, then we have signaling mechanisms which signals to the genome, hey, make proteins which are adapted to cold weather. And when it's very hot, then, hey, make proteins which are species which are made in the spliceosome to have proteins which adapt to the hot weather. So the physical body has adaptive mechanisms which we are not even fully understanding yet how they work. This is kind of sophistication which is operating in our body, which is millions of years ahead of our technology. And ridiculing that, I mean, hey, I'm sorry. We should say who made this is far more intelligent than we are.
Yes, I would have to agree with that conclusion. Let's continue with the snark and over self-confidence between Vino and MD Aware as they continue to embarrass themselves.
Like we're really not optimized, and so the trend in biology is that everything is just good enough, and that's what evolution sort of gets you. Is it gets you to be just good enough to live long enough to pass on that gene, and not any better, right? And we can.
You know, I get so irritated with these moronic talking points. I mean, we have so many different things we're discovering that are optimized to the literal extreme of physics. And like it can't possibly be optimized any greater. There's so many different functions that are being discovered.
He talked about the eye. Our eye can recognize one photon. It goes
right
to the physically possible.
Exactly. It's like, so you're telling me that the thing that can't possibly be better in terms of on the sensing level is just okay? Oh, right. Well, that's interesting. I mean, there's just so many things. I mean, how about the fact that we're having to look into like quantum biology now and little things that for decades and decades were completely ignored because, according to all the quantum physicists, quantum coherence could not possibly be achieved at any level of wetware, as sure as heck not at room temperature. That little temperature range that you're referring to, which is just how could you ever operate in this? Oh wait, turns out that does work, and our bodies do create quantum coherence in a variety of ways in a wetware scenario in temperatures that we never even thought were possible, and for all these extreme, by the way, recognized as fundamentally required for life to exist functions, necessitate this kind of stuff. But no, it's just kind of optimized enough for us to exist. Like get out of town, dude. Oh, so bad.
Another point, John, which I want to outline. At the beginning of life, if you have the transcription and translation mechanism to express the information, but you don't have the machinery to replicate the genetic information, life will not perpetuate. So you need basically both systems implemented for life to start. How did that be coordinated to have at least 30 proteins, which is a minimum in bacteria to have DNA replication, and then at the same time the machinery to transcribe and translate the information? If one of the two is missing, no deal, no life. How was this coordinated?
Well, we just don't know, Angelo. We just don't know. But these guys do.
You can even find examples of where, if we go down to the molecular level, like you're talking about, where this folding is not perfect, it's not normal, but it's good enough, right? If you look at the thalassemias, you can be a heterozygote for like a thalassemia, and your blood's ability to carry oxygen is compromised. It's not normal because the folding of your hemoglobin molecules is abnormal.
John,
but
can
it's
you
functional.
stop
It's
here?
good enough, and people get by with it, right?
So what happens if the amino acid strand comes out of the ribosome and it's not good enough? What happens is that there are error check mechanisms which check if the product coming out of the ribosome is good enough. And if it's not good enough, and if it doesn't fold properly, there are actually chaperones, which are barrel proteins, where the amino acid strand is inserted in, and it gives it the right shape. And these barrel proteins had to be there right from the beginning when life started, because a big percentage of the proteins, they need that shaping after they come out of the ribosome. And if the product isn't good enough, it is discarded and recycled. And the amino acids, they are used for the next protein and an amino acid chain. So where does that technology come from?
In line, again, also to just shut up all the atheists are going to claim that we never back up our stuff. So this paper is available in the open folder, in the subfolder of information encoding, and it's literally about the error correction codes in the genome to back up the point that Otangelo was just making. So you can't claim that with stuff we're just making this up. This is just one. There's actually several papers in that folder, by the way, on the error correction aspects and how Hamming code, distancing, and all that kind of stuff applies to this. So go look it up. Stop denying reality and refusing to go and do research for yourselves. I have it sitting there waiting for you if you want to go look it up. Again, you don't have to agree with the ontology. You do have to accept the fact that you have to account for it in reality. Let's continue. Oh, let me reshare. I forgot to share that again. Hang on. Let's get back to some truth. By the way, I don't know if you guys saw, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, thank you for hanging out with us. I don't know if you saw the thumbnail I did, but up at the top of these guys' heads, I did say truth needed on purpose, given the fact that their show is called Truth Wanted and is the direct antithesis of that, at least from the words coming out of these guys' mouth.
So I don't think it's reasonable to say that this is, this DNA ordering is so precise, because it's really, you can get away with a lot. Vino, anything to add?
I mean, I think really this comes down to Otangelo, like.
Oh, and the one thing I wanted to add about this little point is it's like, dude, you just pointed out that there can be a deprecation of something that does work. Like, you're claiming that it's not information, it's not all these things, because there's evidence that it can break down from something better. I mean, really, did you not think through that point, MD Aware? I'm clearly you did not, because that's some pretty basic critical thinking right there to analyze like your conclusion. I don't know. Does that, you follow what I'm saying there, Otangelo? How that doesn't compute?
Yeah, I'm just putting a link here in the side chat. So
all right, we'll keep. I think right here is where Vino asks you if you understand evolution. This is pretty funny.
You're attributing obviously a lot of importance to the order, and I think that where the major disagreement comes from here is the origin of that order. Not to be glib, but are you familiar with evolution? It is the process by which these sorts of these pieces of information are refined, right? Like we have very, very clear, very well supported ways for this information to come about by natural means, right? You
are talking about information, but we have to start right from the beginning, and you need to have also a minimal sized information to have the first living and self-replicating and a free living cell. And we have
sure, but you're going beyond the purview of evolution, remember? So evolution is about how one thing, moving from one set of...
So you see here, he interrupted me. He didn't permit me to make my point, and he muted me.
Man, well, they do that. And obviously he's trying to like use the, abiogenesis doesn't have to be accounted for in evolution and all that kind of stuff. It's like, bro, in order for evolution to happen, per your own model, you have to account for the origination of the information, which I'm pretty sure you clarified way earlier in this whole back and forth dialogue. So it's just a misdirection as usual from
they are
ACA,
desperate to bring in always in these conversations evolution. And The thing is, they can't do that because we are not talking about an evolution problem. We are talking about something which had to be there for evolution actually to start. Evolution depends on these things that we try to explain.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And it's like it amazes me, like this stuff seems to go over their heads. And I really, at the start of this whole thing off, I really wonder if it's the egotism that clearly consumes these characters, especially Vino. It's priceless. It's like, dude, you're not even grasping the points that are being made, and then condescendingly asking if somebody like, do you understand what evolution is? Like, yeah, bro, I got it. This is funny.
Genetic material into another set of genetic material, right? Changes in allele frequency in populations over time. Classically, the origin of species, not the origin of life, the origin of species. It's about the diversification and the change over time. If you're talking about abiogenesis, then that's another issue. And unfortunately, I think that is something that we can never scientifically know for sure, because it's almost more of a historical question than it is a scientific question, right? But we can hypothesize about...
Yeah. By the way, for all the folks in the audience who listen to this, and for Vino and MD Aware, and all of the atheist talking heads, for the love of all that is good and holy, and academic and scientific and such, what this clown just did was try to say that abiogenesis would only be historical science, and evolution would be a active hard science. It would actually be the reciprocal, potentially, from an experimental perspective, but it's evolutionary biology is recognized as a historical science. Right. Whether or not you want to put abiogenesis or origin of life research into historic or otherwise is irrelevant. He just classified it as not being, and it is designated as a historical science. So get your categories correct, buddy, especially if you've, like, per your own words, have like worked in evolutionary biology and are studying genetics and all this kind of stuff. You're going to freaking PhD, and you don't understand that evolutionary biology is recognized as historic science. Like, I don't understand how these people get PhDs and MDs. It really blows me away.
Yeah, and let me add this, John. We are trying to understand how things came to be, and in operational science, we try to understand how things work. And of course, the same question applies to the origin of life that applies to the origin of species and biodiversity. So it's the same question. We try to elucidate both how life started and how it's diversified. So both issues regard history.
Absolutely. It's just getting crazy. Okay, folks, the call is almost over with Otangelo and these guys, so we will be doing open mic here just a second. I'm about to put the lid in the side chat if people want to get in the back to start joining. And okay, because they got Otangelo on mute right here, and he's about to get irritated, and they're going to cut him off. So let's wrap this up.
But different ways that it could have happened. But I don't think we could ever know for sure, right, Vino? What do you think?
It won't happen again on Earth as it stands, right? Unless we make it, right? The Earth in which life formed is not the Earth we have today, and the conditions we have are not the conditions we have today. So we aren't going to be able to easily replicate that. But like you're saying, we need a minimum amount of information. There are very simple self-replicating molecules which can be, obviously put into some area where they're protected, or at least somewhat protected, and get. By the way,
this part of the conversation cracks me up, because right here, both in just a second, I think MD Aware does as well. They both concede that there's information. I don't even think they realize it. Their dismissal of this, even though they've been denying that there's information, then they're conceding there's information. And I get a chuckle out of it. Let's keep listening.
Enough going that the processes of evolution can start on those self-replicating molecules. Correct me if I'm wrong. Aware, ribozymes, are those not self-replicating RNA molecules?
Yeah, ribozymes. Yeah,
ribozymes. Yeah.
Yep. So, if you want to go to proteins, you can make the argument that prion diseases are examples of self-replicating proteins. But they found molecules that are potentially self-replicating in like the tails of comets, right? These molecules form under not uncommon circumstances, and they're all over the place. Earth is not as special as we think it is.
Well, this is complete hogwash.
Yes, folks, what he's referring to is the fact they found a few amino acids in some comets,
yes,
and meteors or whatever.
That's not
they didn't find full proteins form. They sure as hell didn't find self-replicating proteins. No. They found a few amino acids, not all the ones that are needed. They just found a few. And I think
No, not only this, they did find many different ones which are not used in life.
Right. Well, that, and if I remember correctly, like they're not the chirality problem's not solved.
Yeah, they are racemic. Yeah, sure.
So it's there's a whole bunch of different issues on it. But the point is that he just alluded to that there were like some kind of fully formed proteins, which is just categorically false. It's a categorically false statement. So again, MD Aware, either you're staggeringly ignorant and you're just regurgitating talking points that you've heard that you never actually looked at for yourself, or you're misrepresenting the data. One of the two. I don't know which one it is. But you need to stop doing this stuff, man. It's the second time.
It just so happens that Earth was sort of in the right place at the right time to enable those first, at least we think, self-replicating molecules to gain a foothold and ultimately evolve. And so that's the origin of the, we know very well the origin of the diversity that we see in genetic information, genetic material. But what we don't, and we can't, I think, ever know for sure is how it all started. Again, like Vino said, we can hypothesize, we can postulate, and we can test out.
Have you seen in just a few seconds, he made so many assertions which are just wrong. First of all, science didn't discover self-replicating RNAs or self-replicating molecules or proteins in meteorites or things like that. That's simply not true. And he makes it appear that these are just peanuts things. And when you present it like this is pseudoscience.
Well, you're absolutely right. And beyond that, the ribozymes he's referring to, they self-ligate. I don't know how many times I have to regurgitate this. They self-ligate. They're not full self-replication in the sense that needs to be accounted for. Like,
yeah,
I've had this conversation with Dr. Gart, PhD biochemist, multiple times, and other PhD biochemists. Same thing. Like, this is established. Like, they know that they're not, but then people like MD Aware and all these atheists on YouTube run around, oh, that's already been solved. You don't know about this? Yeah. And it's like, no. Exactly. The freaking paper was retracted, dude. Like, it didn't happen. Okay, it didn't happen. You guys got to stop spewing this talking point. It's not reality.
They try to make believe that we are talking about things which are peanuts. And that is just leading people astray and into a false direction. It's not true. These are huge abiogenesis problems which are not solved.
No, they're not. They're not even close to being solved. And I think it's indicative. It's kind of, if people go and like listen to the whole this whole episode, close to the beginning, after that initial like introduction spot I played, Vino goes on this long explanation about like how he was, or maybe it was after, I forget when it was. Anyway, at some point he talks about how he's like a third or fourth generation atheist and all that kind of stuff. And he just didn't realize there are people that actually think this stuff. And it's like, yeah, bro. So I can say the same thing about you. I can't believe there's actually people that think this stuff about origin of life research and biology and biological systems and how we freaking exist and the dismissals of all the fundamental principles from science, which you guys rely upon as your fountain of, or the foundation of your worldview. But then you're going to accuse people such as myself or Tangelo who come to the conclusion there must be an intelligent agent preceding all this in order for it to be logical, plausible, and probable that we could exist. And we are the ones who are ignorant. It is truly astounding. Okay, we're almost to the end of this one, and then we will let Jackson Rowe is backstage. He'll be coming in. Anybody else who wants to join the after show, the link is pinned inside chat now if you want to call in.
How we think it might have happened, but we can never know for sure because, again, it's a historical question.
Okay, so what is the function of the genetic code?
To self-replicate.
Yeah.
No. The function of the genetic code is an assignment of 64 codons to 20 amino acids, and it is required in translation through the ribosome. Okay, and you have 64 codon words, which are three nucleotides.
But Otangelo, you're imparting these properties onto them, right? You're calling them words. There's nothing in DNA that says that it is that those codons are words or anything like that, right? The function of DNA is what it does, right? And what it does is DNA is transcribed into our.
Okay, the stupidity again of this statement is just a stagger. It's just astonishing, to be honest.
Yes,
I mean, like, dude, that's like saying if you had the block codes of zeros and ones on a freaking hard drive and you read them or you looked at them and you cracked the code and figured out what the value assignments were, and then you also knew English, therefore you could like coordinate all the zeros and ones that are representative of A to Z, and then what the value. I mean, like. No, there's no words here. Like, I mean, dude, we're talking about like commands. And by the way, again, in greater detail, in multiple papers, it goes into great detail about the equivalence of words and letters and how it all strings together, the syntactic rules, semantic values, the pragmatic interpretations, etc., etc., etc. All of this stuff from a linguistics perspective is clearly delineated in a plethora of papers for the last 30 freaking years. Actually, some going back to 50 years, but I'd say no less than 30 years. Actually more like 40 years at this point, has been around for a long time. It's not even being argued about in modern science. And yet we still have people arguing about this stuff. It's just astounding. Before I click play, Tangela, you have anything you want to add?
No, I was astounded by his answer, by Vino's answer, because I didn't ask a very difficult question. This is basic biology. And I answered in one of the comments on the video to one of the commenters, and MD Aware, he got upset. But I also told him direct in the email, I'm sorry, but we are talking here about very basic biology, and you guys don't know this and can't answer such a basic question. I was really surprised.
Yeah, it's disturbing. It is very disturbing. While we click play, I'm gonna see if I can find a paper that talks about this specifically.
RNA in humans, it's then translated into proteins, which then carry out a function. And some of that function is to self-replicate, and some of it is to build different types of cells. You can't attribute any knowledge or something like or sentience to just function.
Well, no, it is not the function to self-replicate. The self-replication is to keep the information stored, because otherwise you cannot keep life continuing. But that's not the function of the information and the genetic code. The function is to make the building blocks of life, the basic building blocks, and the machines which make them, and to operate the cell. That's the function, and not to self-replicate.
Right. Well, and a quick sidebar, Otangelo, I would say the only slight distinction of your point about the words would be that the completed protein is actually the word, and each nucleotide is the letter. Because you have both. Okay, so if like from a coding theory perspective, you have both like the base letters, right? But then you can, with block codes and such, you can have an organization of multiple letters to actually equal something bigger, right? And in this context, in some cases it could be a word. In other cases, it could be other code types. It could be a letter, right? So in this context, I agree with you. You can say it in both ways, but I would say to be 100% correct, and I know there's papers on this, by the way. I'm trying to find one that's talked about this, but the entirety of that sequence would be the word.
No, I would say it like this, John. You have the codons, which are the words. You have the string of the codons, which are lined up, which is the sentence. You have the start and stop sign, which would be then where the sentence starts and where it ends. That would be one of the usually several subunits of the protein. And then you have the several amino acid strands which then compose the protein, and you could describe that as the chapter.
No, I'm agreeing. You can extrapolate it to that far. I'm just saying, I'm talking about from just a pure code theory perspective and like the clear designation. That's all I'm talking about. I agree with what you're saying can be applicable from the macro view. I'm talking about more on like the individual level. That's neither here nor there. We can discuss that another time. But anyway, okay, let's continue on, because these guys are just ridiculous, and we're almost done with this. We got people waiting backstage. I think there's like 1 more minute left.
Well, the thing is that these are actually each codon is a word, is a genetic word, and it has a meaning because it is assigned to an amino acid, and that assignment has.
It's not assigned in the way that you are. It's not assigned in the way that you're implying, right? It's assigned in that the chemical interaction it corresponds to a particular amino acid. But as you may know, like different codons can code for the same amino acid, and vice versa.
Does a meteor entering the atmosphere, is that assigned to fall to Earth, or is it just what's going to happen, right? You're attributing so much more meaning than there has to be.
Yeah, I mean this.
Vino never just. I mean, trust it. Truth wanted Never let this guy be a host on your show again. This is just astonishing. I mean, okay, I hope these dudes actually will. I mean, whether they accept the challenge or not, who knows? We'll see. The fact that these guys claim to have formerly hosted a radio show and podcast about all this stuff. They formed a club. They used to debate people on abiogenesis and all this kind of stuff. They used to debate people, they claim, and are going to sit here and talk about freaking meteors falling having any relevance to digital data and the necessities for it to exist and what it entails. Like, really? You guys did debates? Did you ever do research for your debates? I'm guessing not, because this is hysterical. Let's continue. We're almost done here. I got to pee soon.
This gets back to, I think, to a certain degree, Occam's razor, right? If you don't need to multiply entities beyond necessity, and we don't need to invoke a being to have DNA follow physical processes, right? Do you agree, Otangelo, that DNA follows physical processes?
Yes, it follows physical processes, and you guys are.
So then, why don't we just stop there? Why don't we just stop there? Because we can't say you can't be.
Yeah, pretty sure I read a paper earlier about this on how they follow the laws of physics and chemistry, but are not determined by them. MD Aware. Apparently, you are not as aware as you claim to be, even though I think I looked it up earlier. And did you guys know? Let's see, MD Aware actually is a medical term. Let me Google this. Let me pull this back up here. Let's see. The term MD Aware is used in clinical medicine to relay that a physician has been notified of some sort of information. Okay, so MD Aware. You have been made aware that your talking points are ridiculous. Please stop spewing them. It is sad. It is embarrassing. It is ridiculous. You are just completely deprecating your. I mean, I just can't. I can't handle this. It's okay. We're almost done. Let's keep going.
Be sure.
I am unable sentence, and you guys cut me off and put me on mute.
Go ahead.
It's very difficult to have a meaningful conversation when this all happens.
Go ahead, Otangelo.
I have not 1 minute to talk, and then you talk for 10 minutes. So it is very difficult to have an honest conversation.
Go ahead, Otangelo.
Okay. So you have a redundancy there, and that confers robustness to the genetic code. And the genetic code is 1 in a million. It is more robust than 1 million alternative codes. And yes, you have assignment of meaning. And we only know of intelligence which is capable of doing that, which is capable of assigning meaning to a word. And that is precisely.
Okay. I think I found the error in your argument there, Otangelo. You said we only know of intelligence doing this, right? And that is basically the definition of an argument from incredulity or an argument from ignorance, right? In your opinion, you don't believe that anything but an intelligence could do this, and we don't believe that, right?
I can think of at least one example.
Yeah, and like both Vino and I have worked in biology labs. I specifically, at one point, worked in a plant genetics lab where I was looking at the evolutionary biology.
And there it is, ladies and gentlemen, the admittance that he shouldn't have any excuse to be this freaking ignorant. He just claims to have worked in a biology lab in plant genetics. He claims to be getting a PhD in genetics. He is currently a medical doctor, a surgeon, apparently. And they're making these positions. Like, this is astonishing. Again, ladies and gentlemen, as I wanted to go all the way to this end here where he makes his admittance, so nobody can claim that I didn't present him accurately, nor am not holding him, nor am holding him to an inappropriate standard of knowledge per his own position. And again, in my first review of his interactions, he went into further detail about his position and all of this. If you don't believe me, go to my other review of this guy. And anyway,
you have certain plants, and so I've seen firsthand how these things happen. And so, like, I think really that's what it comes down to. I'm really glad you called in, Otangelo. Unfortunately, I think we should keep moving. And so I'm gonna say goodbye to you. But thanks for calling in. I really did appreciate it. What did you think, Vino?
Yeah, I mean, I always love listening to Otangelo, and I've recently found out I love talking to him as well. It brings me back to as you know, we have publicly debated abiogenesis and evolution and whatnot, and really harkens back to the good old days of science versus less than science.
Yeah.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it, ladies and gentlemen. Harkens back to the days of science and less than science, coming from the mouth of the guy who clearly doesn't know that much about science, and his little buddy. So I don't know what to say, folks. That is what it is. Before we start letting some people in from backstage, Otangelo, you got any final words?
Well, I think this is the typical dismissal where they say it's science against religion. And that's just not what it is. We are looking at the same evidence, what is, and we try to make the right interpretation and to come to meaningful conclusions in regards of where all these things came from. And it's either intelligence was involved or intelligence was not involved. That's as easy as it gets. And I don't understand how these people think that non-intelligence has more creative power than intelligence to make the most sophisticated things, which we, as intelligent as we are incapable of instantiating.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. Well, we're now into after show time, ladies and gentlemen. Jackson Rose joined us. We got the one and only Redefined Living. I think Slavic was backstage and he dropped out. Anybody wants to join? Link is in the side chat. It's also pinned. Come on in, share your thoughts. Let's have some combo. We never know where this may go, and we should have some fun. So, Jackson, you've been waiting for quite some time. Appreciate you being patient as we finish all that up. What are your thoughts? How you doing? And welcome to the stream as well.
Thanks. I'm not feeling too good. I tested positive for COVID today, but yeah, I pretty much agree with what you guys are saying. It's definitely a code. I don't know much about genetics. I've been reading up on it the past week or so, actually, trying to learn more about it, but that's really all I have to say about it so far.
Well, that's good, man. I'm glad to hear that you. I know I went off on you on one of the after shows about only strictly relying on more on the fossil record and such, and not knowing the much about the genetics. So I got to give you props for taking the time.
You didn't really go off on me. You just kind of brought it up.
Well, no, I mean I not like went off on you, but I mean I gave you a hard time about it. Kind of called you out about it. So I appreciate the fact that you're going to look, because as I was diatribing multiple times throughout the stream, there's a plethora of people who debunk, or I say claim to debunk, like the positions that Otangelo and I and others make, but then don't know anything about it, and then never actually go and look at it, to back up their BS, right? So I appreciate that very much that you do that. And I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well, man. Make sure you get your, I think I saw the people get your vitamin D, your vitamin C, your zinc, get some elderberry. Yes, get all zooped up, because obviously you're in the age demographic where you ain't got much to worry about, unless you got. Yeah. I'm guessing you probably don't have too many at your age. You probably don't have too many comorbidities you got to worry about.
Sorry, what did you say? I didn't catch that last bit.
I said, I'm assuming at your age, you probably don't have a bunch of comorbidities you got to worry about.
Oh, no, not much to worry about with COVID, I don't think.
Well, that's good. That's good, man. We'll hope you get better soon. Redefine Living. What's up, man? Hey, Sam, how are you? I mean, have you broken off your addiction with Clubhouse and you come back to YouTube? Like, what's going on, man?
It's not at all. In fact, I was I got a new mic. Does it work, by the way?
Yeah, you sound good, man. You're coming through great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was on that thing all day today. Pretty much all day, every day.
No, I didn't go on at all, but I hadn't seen you the last couple of days when I hopped in, so I thought maybe that your wife had finally staged intervention and
my brother got married.
Or Clubhouse.
Yeah, right. Well, she'd be up for that, but my brother got married yesterday, and so Saturday we did the rehearsal all day, and then yesterday it was a big wedding all day. So yeah, the last 2 days I've been going through withdrawals. So today I had to double down and get on it all day.
Okay, that makes sense. So, what did you think about the review that we just did here? Anything stick out to you? What are your thoughts on the brilliance of the Truth Wanted host?
Yeah, well, so the thing with the argument, the information argument, it's A from not A, right? A is something that's not made of matter. How did you get that from matter? That's essentially the argument, right? Would you say that's fair?
Yes.
Well, you're right.
Yeah, so,
and I forget who it was. I'll have to look it up, because I think it might have been Newman or Wiener. I forget. One of the founding fathers of cybernetics and information theory made the clear, it's been well accepted, like the clear distinction between matter, energy, and information. Like that information is its own thing, and it can be contained in matter, but it is not matter itself. And
the easy to understand is you can take the same string of letters, you can write them on sand or on a paper or on a hard disk or whatever, and it is the same information. It doesn't depend on the medium where it is stored.
Right.
So that explains why it is not a physical entity. It is something which is mentally produced, and it is not physical.
Yeah,
Okay,
but from the point
I was
of the,
I was correct. It was Norbert Wiener. Information is information, not matter or energy.
yeah, from a point of a purely naturalistic worldview, when you're trying to explain all of these things with matter and motion, that's fine. But how do you get A from not A? How do you arrange matter or multiply matter in such a way that the end result is something that is not made of matter? That's an absurdity. That's not something that's logically that's not something that can logically happen. It's
Well,
A
the
from
end
not
result. Well, the end result is made of matter eventually. If you are talking like a blueprint to make a car, the car, of course, is made of matter, but the structure is what is different, right?
Yeah,
So,
we'll grant the physical medium. We'll grant even if we were to grant the chemicals and all of these things, you still have to arrange them in the same way to like, how do you get a thought from that? How do you get a yes or a no or a concept or a moral anything? How do you magically get all of these things from a purely naturalistic origins? That's the question I've been asking, and I haven't received a good answer.
Well, that's because short of either conceding, well, I think part of the reason you'll get much of an answer is they never want to concede that the intelligent agent might be a plausible explanation. They want to just, huh? What'd you say, Jackson?
I always say it might be a possible explanation.
Jackson,
you're more. Hey, guys,
it's not science.
Hang on, guys. Before we go into open discussion, Slavic is with us as well. Your turn to talk, brother. What'd you think? And then we'll go into open discussion. And I got to go pee real quick. I'll be back.
I thought it was interesting. The only thing I kind of stuck out for me was when you guys brought up that the codon is like a word, I think, or something like that. And I was thinking, like, if DNA is like information, it's like pretty much zipped information. It's like, compressed, and then it gets decompressed to make whatever the cells or whatever it needs to produce. And I was thinking, I wonder if that's like even like mathematically possible, that randomly you can generate a system that will zip information. Because like it's one thing to make random information, but to make it zip it and then unzip it, that takes a lot more processing, I guess, of information and keep it like in order.
Yeah, maybe you are talking about when the chromosomes are compressed in the nucleus, right? That would be some kind of zipping, of compressing, but the nucleotides, they are not compressed somehow.
What about a topoisomerase?
Well, topoisomerase is just an enzyme which disentangles chromosomes, right? So it has nothing to do with compression of the chromosome.
So I'm still learning about this stuff, but so when there's when it edits the DNA code or genome, and it goes through and it error corrects, and then it also takes out slices, and then like re-slices another part of the DNA back into it.
No, Slavic, you're 100% correct on the zipping, unzipping, the compression. Like, it's recognized that it's a reason there's so much money being invested in DNA data storage, is because it's recognized as the densest data compression known, right? Like, it is the most optimal data compression and storage medium that we're aware of, right? And so that's a big deal. And and by the way, I'm actually going to pull my screen here and see if I can find this thing, because folks who've been listening to me for a while, you've heard me go on tangents about multiplexing of codes and how the genetic code we've just recently found out is multiplexing as well. So real quick, I'm going to read this. So this is from a tech deal what I'm about to read here, but then we'll go to the paper. So multiplexing or muxing is a way of sending multiple signals or streams of information over a communication link at the same time in the form of a single complex signal. When the signal reaches its destination, a process called demultiplexing or demuxing recovers the separate signals and outputs them into individual lines. Multiplexing is a method used by networks to consolidate multiple signals, digital or analog, into a single composite signal that is transported over a common medium, such as a fiber optic cable or radio wave. You could also insert mRNA sequence or DNA, obviously. When the composite signal reaches its destination, it is demultiplexed and the individual signals are restored and made available for processing. Now, the next thing I'm going to pull up here, so you can kind of see this. So you would be following the same logic or the same path if you just had one message, right, going over the channel medium, or you could have multiple aspects. You have an additional encoder process. You have to have a decoder on the other side that can, as it was talking about in the description I just read, disentangle all the pieces and then decode them into their separate information strands, right? So the reason I bring this up is because a couple years ago, this paper came out and study on the genetic code comparison with multiplexed codes, right? So this entire paper is all about how what I'm talking about is applicable to the genetic code and how there's all these different things. There's error correction involved in this, et cetera, et cetera. But this whole paper, the entire paper, is about how that is relevant to what we're now discovering is in the genetic code, okay? And let's get their end piece here. Well, anyway, at some point in the paper, they talk about how the genetic code is like optimal for multiplexing, which I thought was rather interesting. And anyway, one of the reasons I bring this up is A, it's cool as heck, but B, puts an additional layer you have to account for, and C, anybody who claims that there is no freaking code, how can you be having to account for multiplexing codes if there isn't a freaking original code? And how can you have either of those if there's no information? And then yet we still have people on ACA and all these different shows running around claiming that folks like us who make the position that there is information that it is required and must be accounted for, that we're somehow ignorant and don't understand the science. And nobody agrees with us, and except for Jackson. And yet there's all these papers, this is a few of the ones I've touched on, right, that are going into like 15 layers deeper than this whole, like, is there information or not? And what kind is it? And they're getting into these like crazy, like, holy crap, this stuff does all sorts of things we didn't even realize. We didn't even know what to look for until relatively recently. Now we're having our minds blown. And we're still arguing with uninformed atheists. It's astonishing. Anyway, enough of my diatribe. That all make sense, guys?
Yeah. I was thinking, even how does the error correction system work? Does it have another copy of the DNA that it just compares it to, or like, 'cause I haven't looked to that, so it's specific.
Well, there's multiple. Here's the thing, man. There's like a bunch of different error correction. It's not just one. There's like a plethora of different error correction mechanisms that fix specific types of errors. Dude, the error correction stuff will blow your freaking mind. The spliceosome stuff that you were referring to earlier, that's cool, right? I mean, just the whole fact that it's doing all that stuff is nuts. But then like the different proteins that are like the error correction, it's like, oh, this one just fixes errors in like mRNAs. This one just fixes errors in like DNA replication. This one fixes this type of error in it. And there's like all these different things we're just now starting to discover of like how it's being able to read and identify the errors. And then it comes in, like some of them like do a complete like little segment cutout, come in, cut it out, and then come back in and replace it with the correct one. Other ones do like individual error correct. It's mind blowing stuff, man.
Yeah, I gotta look into a little bit more of that error correction. I think that probably is the strongest point. You know, it'll point to strongest that, you know, it can't just randomly happen. Let's say that way.
Hey, do you guys believe that some creationists don't, that new information can come about in the genome through mutations?
Well, when you say new information, are you talking about duplications or shuffling, or
Can
truly
be
new?
duplications, yeah.
Well, so just for clarification, like I have a paper that, or a study anyway, that regarding fruit flies, and they say in this study that they have done all possible mutations, and nothing new. I believe they did some weird thing where they made eyes pop all over the thing, which is kind of interesting. They've doubled the wings on it.
Gene duplication or something.
Yeah, but they were all of these things were detrimental to the thing. You know, like the wings, the new set of wings didn't fly. They made it so the whole fruit fly couldn't get into the air. So all of these things had really negative effects, but nothing new, like nothing that wasn't like no gills popped out, or, and that's with doing all mutations, all possible sequences of mutations done on fruit flies. I think I have another one that is the same thing on worms, yeast, I think, if I'm right, and then maybe even fleas. There's a few studies like that where they've done all mutations, and they say they've done, based on math. They say that all the mutations have been done in the human population also, because if each human picks up approximately 100 mutations per generation, and we have 7 billion people on Earth, and so that's 700 billion mutations per generation. It adds up quick. No evolution in a Darwinian sense.
All right. I've been reading a bunch of papers recently. Like I'm looking at one now. It says evolution of novel genes in 3-spine stickleback fish populations. Just various things like that. Seems to be like new genes arising, like de novo gene birth or gene duplication, but then further mutations on the duplicated section, as far as I understand it.
A huge portion of the de novo stuff is assumption that it is de novo in a lot of cases. Other ones where they have seen stuff, it's when you go further into it, a huge portion of them are like pseudogenes that appear to get activated and were claimed to have not been, and like when they see like different pieces snipped away from them and then now has a function, that's somehow de novo. Case in point, it's a paper in my folder from 2020 specifically about like how pseudogenes need to stop being called pseudogenes, because we're now discovering out the wazoo that there's all sorts of functions, and that there's been a deprecation of research because we've been assuming they weren't doing anything, even though we see them like basically like pulled out of mothballs, if you will, and activated, and now have functions, or they were being transcribed, but we thought they didn't have a function, and now our technology's reached the point where we can identify they have a function. So a lot of the stuff that, but all that said, we are observing things that appear to be rearrangements of pre-existing sequences that create theoretically a new function. However, it's not the result of mutation. It's the result of direct
like recombination or something.
Not just recombination. I'm talking about in real time, based on a external force. Your cells are rewriting portions of it. It's not fucking mutation. Excuse my French. I hate the word mutation in relation to like adaptation, all that kind of stuff. To me, in the modern era in which we live, is just a refusal to accept the new reality. That when we have, like, every single one of your cells is surrounded by, and Dr. Gar could attest this even more than I could, are surrounded by input-output sensors everywhere, right? And signals are being sent in real time based on the external data. And then all sorts of crazy modifications are happening on the fly inside of your cell in real time. And then we have morons running around being like, oh, that's proof of evolution. It's like, what are you talking about, dude? There's absolutely nothing random about this. Like we now have the technology to observe in real time, like temperature change X, signal is sent from external source on your skin or whatever into organ cells. This signal indicates that it's now cold outside, which then sends a signal to the nucleus to now execute X, Y, and Z protein synthesis. right? It's like very hyper controlled stuff. Or in the case of the like antibody creation, like yes, there's random portions of the genome that are like scrambled in real time, and then added on to the controlled fixed structure, so that you can find figure out if this one fits the a previously unencountered antigen, right? But the like 90% of it stays the exact same, and then you have another portion that's a controlled random search for the correct fit, from a three-dimensional perspective, right? And the chemistry binding and all that. Like, to me, that's why I was like, how you claim that this is a proof of like random uncontrolled mutation? No, it's a proof of like freaking AI in real time finding solutions on the fly. Which, by the way, for those who are involved, and Slavic can probably test this much more than I can, but like, if we could create a antivirus software that could on the fly write the code necessary to be able to counter a previously, a new virus that's being to try and hack a system, you would be the richest freaking person on this planet. You think I'm correct or incorrect on that, Slavic? If you're able to pull that off.
For sure. I mean, any kind of thing that will do it on the fly would be crazy, amazing.
And in the context of what we're observing in biological systems, we're watching digital data being like modified on the fly in a very not a random, in a controlled fashion. A component of that controlled fashion might be random, but the overall component, the overall process is controlled, and that's what's doing really cool, crazy stuff. And then neo-Darwinism kicks in. It just, to me, it's like it's laughable at this point. Anyway, enough of my diatribe.
Yeah, what do you think of like horizontal gene transfer, like a bacteria adding genetic information to a plant or something?
I'm not too aware of it, like bacteria to plant, bacteria to bacteria. I'm very familiar with but horizontal gene transfer. They're now looking. I always forget if the term is. I think it's the megagenome is the term we're going with. It's a megagenome. I think it's megagenome. I forget. I have to look it up. I'll have to find it. I think it's the megagenome. But basically, what they're looking at is that yes, there seems to be all this horizontal. There's all this horizontal gene transfer. There's like we've thought it was like proof of this new formation. But the point you have to come to is, well, if certain organisms had more of it in the past and it's been split up and spread across a much broader platform, right? We're not necessarily having novel gene transfer. We're having gene transfer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is novel from the evolutionary sense. You follow me?
You mean it would be like a reassembly?
It's novel to that organism. If that makes any sense.
Well, it might be novel to that particular bacteria, but not necessarily all bacteria.
Yeah.
Right. Or even all bacteria of that particular type. Right. They've done experiments. They've realized this, and it's something that's being discussed in greater detail. Relatively, not like in the last year or two, but I mean like in a relatively recent perspective, like this whole concept of I forget if it's megagenome or what I think it's megagenome. I forget. Anyway, I read some papers on some stuff on it last year. That there's this. Yes, there's all these potential genes, but it doesn't mean, again, that they didn't already exist or that they were formed from the traditional evolutionary process. They were already there. And then, because one of the other things they've been realizing is that with this horizontal gene transfer, there's much more control to it. Like there's signals that are being sent between the organisms, and then there's it appears to be controlled transfer of the information. So it's not random at all in the sense that we're told all this stuff is. It appears to be, again,
I wouldn't call it random in that sense either.
Well, right. But so my point is, like, we have control. If we have controlled information transfer, right, that would be like saying, oh, cool, I have a script that can solve X, Y, and Z, and it's on GitHub somewhere. And then somebody's like, hey man, let me send it to you. And they send you a link to this script that's housed on a server in GitHub, and you go and get it. And then somebody like, oh, well, that's clearly evolved. That's clearly proof of evolution. If you're like, what are you talking about, dude? Somebody wrote that script. you're an idiot. Like you think that because it was sitting out there and you could be able to access it and then insert it into your program or make a little modification to it, and like bam, now that script executes inside of your system, you'd be considered a freaking idiot if you ever made that argument. Except in the context of evolutionary biology, that's exactly the argument that's being made, and it's part of the reason I get so irritated with this stuff. And I mean, Slavic's a programmer; he can speak to this in even greater detail than I can. But am I right on that? If like somebody did what I described and then claimed it evolved, it was like novel function, would you laugh at them?
Yeah, for sure. The thing is that it's not a, let's say, it's the same thing as having, you know, like in Java, there's libraries. Doesn't mean that the library didn't come from somebody else designing it.
Or that the library didn't exist prior to you using one of the things in the library.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was thinking, is there any is there any experiments that they have done that show any kind of new functions happening randomly, or you know, popping up randomly that let's say a cell or an organism had or did not have, and then through, let's say, even like randomly generating, you know, new cells over and over again with some new information or a new function happen, not like something that was like hidden under the, you know, what are they called? What's that? You know, not recessive, but like something completely brand new that organism did not have. Because I don't think I've ever seen that kind of experiment done.
I mean, there's some different things that allude to maybe the vast majority that I'm aware of are not truly 100% novel. It's always been restructuring of existing stuff or activation of something we didn't know they had. So it's, I don't know. And to be honest, like a lot of that stuff we keep, you know, if you keep going down the rabbit hole, there seems to be like alternative explanations for it. And or did it precede, or is it literally controlled modification of something that already exists in real time and not from a like just purely, you know, random mutation and natural selection type concept?
Yeah, because like the most of the stuff I've seen was that they're pretty much saying that, oh look, now there's this this bacteria is now resistant to like this antibiotics, and it's every time it's losing some information that now, you know, there's no effect, there's no information transfer between the antibiotics and the bacteria, so that's how they become resistant, by losing information. I haven't seen the gain information.
Yeah, they're very narrow examples of benefit, but they come at a cost. So the example would be stripping your doors off your car to make it lighter so you'll get better gas mileage. It might work, but when winter or summer comes along, you're not going to have, you know, an efficient cooling or heating system anymore. You don't have doors.
I was reading some duplication mutation led to protein development in snake venom, so I would call that a gain.
But was that a gain, like that snake never had venom, or is it like in the, let's say, I know it's not called a recessive gene, but let's say in there, like, you know how there's evolutionary pressure, like hairs
epigenome?
grow. Yeah, epigenome, because they grow. Like, let's say you took a dog and you put it out, or a hare, you put it in the summer, it loses its fur, and then in the winter it grows. So it's like it's hidden in the back layers. Let's say that way.
Well, I'm not sure. I'd have to read it a little more. I've just been skimming articles for the past week or so I have to look into it a bit more. But so,
are you familiar with any of those epigenetic changes, Jackson?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about a little bit. I mean,
well, there was a few people in the deep water diver people that, you know, they were able to hold their breath for a long time, and then I think there was also, like, you know, a high altitude group of people, and they thought that these were examples of them evolving in a Darwinian sense, like beneficial type mutations to better suit their environment. But it turns out that they were just, pre-existing switches in their epigenome that were turned on so that they would be better suited for their environment. So these changes were there from the beginning, which screams an intelligence type scenario where these switches were put in from the beginning to be turned on and off.
You would think that, like, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, you would think that if there's extra DNA information that it's not necessary, you would assume that if genetic, or if evolution is true, it would get rid of everything that takes up more energy. That becomes an hindrance, not like specific a hindrance, but let's say you evolved in the desert, right? And if you move to the water climate, you don't need as much information that you built up in the desert in your DNA. You would assume that you would get rid of it, because if you're keeping it in your genome, you would always be expending energy and fuel to keep that inside your genetic information. You have to keep always replicating it. You have to keep building it. And if you get rid of it, then you don't need to keep it up. So, like, let's say if there's a snake that has venom, you would assume that the epigenome would be just thrown away if you don't need it. But it seems like all this extra information that, like, people are carrying around, or animals are carrying around, it is there for a reason. To make sure that they can adapt to other climates. It seems more like it's designed to keep it around instead of just tossing it.
Maybe, but like the Australian lungfish has such a gigantic genome. I don't know if it's all doing something, or some of it's relics from the past, or I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert in this. I have to look into that. But
yeah, so like I bought a new truck, and it has all kinds of buttons in there. I have no idea what they do. But one day my kids are going to get in there, going to show me all these things. We'll figure out they were there the whole time.
Yeah, and then that's kind of the whole point, is that if it's, it makes sense if you would assume that. I mean, like I said, I'm not an expert in evolution, but I'm just assuming that evolution, it's not trying to make you survive in every single climate or make you adaptable. Evolution does not care. All it cares about is the next generation. That means you need to pass on your genes. It doesn't care about that in the future you might move to the North Pole, or you might move to the jungle. That stuff, there's no future planning. So all that matters is that if you survive in this exact place right now you're in, and if you're the best at surviving, which means you have to be the most efficient, you have to be the most skilled or whatever, and the less efficient you are, the more you will die, and you can't pass on the genes, right? So you would think that all the epigenome information, it would be just extra expenditure of energy and resources that you just, like, I would assume that it would. Why would you need it if evolution is not interested in the future? All it cares about is now. That's my kind of like thought.
Guys, I think you have triggered Dr. Gart, because it's past his bedtime, and he's joined the stream. So let's let Dr. Gart have the floor, because his wife is probably glaring at him right now. Either that, or she's asleep and he snuck away. So, Dr. Gart, appreciate you coming to the stream. How you doing, sir?
John, you know me too well.
Well, what's on your mind? I saw you making some comments in side chat. I'm assuming you're probably wanting to clarify a few of those.
Yeah. It was kind of weird being on the chat, because people kept asking me questions, and I wanted to hear what you guys were saying. So,
I'm sorry, Sai. I also distracted you.
Yeah, I know. You're one of the culprits, Otangelo.
I apologize.
And so anyway, yeah, about the energy thing, that's very interesting, Slavic. I used to think the same thing because it simply doesn't make sense. There's so much DNA that we don't even know what it does. A lot of it is really does seem, it's not all junk, but a lot of it does seem to be junk. It's just repeated virus sequences and things. And all of that gets replicated all the time. And wouldn't it be more efficient to get rid of it? And it does seem logical that that would be true. But in fact, there are plants who have with genomes that are 10 times the size of ours. I mean, it's amazing. I think there's a salamander that has this gigantic genome, and the great majority of it is not useful. So it turns out that the reality is that energy is not an issue in life or in evolution, because there is more than enough energy around. What these animals tend to do is just have very good systems for eating or producing energy in any way they can, and it's not an issue. It turns out in evolution, you can there's no selective advantage to getting rid of excess DNA that you don't need. And there is some advantage in keeping it, because a lot of that, what used to be called junk DNA, is actually, I think somebody said that before, a lot of that DNA is sort of the birthplace of new genes. So there can be like a pseudo gene or a broken gene that does absolutely nothing, or even just a random sequence which doesn't do anything. And then it can end up with enough mutations turning into a brand new gene. And these are called orphan genes. And they're the sources of new genes. They're very rare. It doesn't happen very often. But occasionally there are many examples known of brand new genes. Nobody knows where they came from. They just seem to have occurred, and they get expressed, and they make new proteins that have never been seen before. So, evolution, I mean, there's a selective advantage to having smaller DNA, but that seems to have disappeared with prokaryotes. I mean, it stayed with the prokaryotes. For eukaryotes, there's no evidence at all that there's any advantage in getting rid of extra DNA.
No, I understand that. I was just wondering, in the beginning stages, when it were just few cells and stuff, I was wondering, to replicate a cell, the smaller the cell would be, the easier it'd be to replicate it, because not just energy, but I'm just talking about, like, let's say material, because it take a bunch of material. Like, if you have to double yourself in size every single time to just to grow or to survive or pass on your genes, I was wondering, the more you have to do that, the smaller it is, the better. So it would be it would like
that. Yeah, that's
block.
true. And the thing is, one thing you have to think about when you talk about evolution is you can't talk about evolution before the existence of Luca, the last universal common ancestor, which is a hypothetical cell that could do almost everything that modern cells do. It grows, like you said, it takes in food, it finds food, it moves, it metabolizes. It has it has several hundred enzymes, proteins, which are made by this very complex system of protein synthesis. It has a genetic code. Why do I say all this? Because every cell we know of has those things in common. So it's a hypothetical organism that existed, and we have no idea how it came to be. That's all part of abiogenesis. And evolution could not have been the process that led to that, because you need all those systems to get evolution. And so, where do those systems come from? They can't evolve because you need them to have evolution, and they have to be accurate. And
So
John
I
knows
have
about this. We've talked about it before. There's this chicken and egg story, which is really quite serious. You have to not only have replication of cells, you have to have very accurate replication of cells in order to have evolution. So we're starting with a very advanced thing. Okay, it doesn't seem advanced to us as an animal, but when you compare it to, anything that's non-alive, the last universal common ancestor is amazingly complex, and we don't know how it came to be. That is.
I would like to ask you another question. Since you believe that evolution is true, do you believe that we have a common ancestor with apes?
That's a whole nother discussion, because that has to do with the nature of humanity, which it's too late for me to get into that.
Okay.
I mean, I think that what makes us human is not our evolutionary descent from primates. I think what makes us human is the image of God, which is not part of science and not part of evolution. And that's why we're talking, and that's why we're doing the things that we do as human beings, which no other animal has ever done. So when it comes to humanity, I have said this many times, especially in the last few weeks. I say evolution starts with Luca and ends before humans.
So you would say that we are a special creation then?
In some way, and I don't know how, but yeah, absolutely. There's no natural explanation for the things that we can do and the things that we do.
Yeah, I would like to quote you here from a recent science paper which I discovered, and it says the best evidence of the exquisite degree of accuracy of the contemporary molecular definition of human-specific regulatory sequences is exemplified by the identification of 35,074 single nucleotide changes that are fixed in humans, distinct from other primates, and located within differentially accessible chromatin regions during the human brain development in cerebral organoids. So my question is,
I'm aware of that.
That means that our human brain is differently wired, that the gene regulatory network has 35,000 different single nucleotide changes. So this is specific human. So my question is, let's suppose that...
Hey, Otangelo, quick pause. Andrew's leaving. Andrew, appreciate you very much. This $20 super chat. Appreciate that very much. This is LPP. Check out John Lennox's book, 2084, Great Rebuttal to Noah Harari's Homo Deus. Very good read. I'm going to tell you about it. Thanks, Maddox. Good night. All got to go to work. Well, Andrew, appreciate it very much. Have a good time at work. I will check that out. I'm actually finishing up Lennox's Gunning for God book, which is very interesting. I will definitely have to check this one out. Appreciate that very much, Andrew. Thanks so much. Okay, go ahead, Angelo. Sorry for interrupting you there.
So my question, Sai, is let's suppose that the evolutionary timeline is adequate and the common ancestor would have split 6 million years ago. Do you think that 6 million years would be sufficient to fix 35,000 gene regulatory mutations in the human brain?
The issue of human evolution is very unusual in many respects, one of which is that it seems to have happened very, very quickly, if you think about it. Okay, I mean, Homo sapiens have been on the scene 200,000 years. So
right, but if we take even... Yeah, no, but now let's suppose that in the best case it would be 6 million years. Do you think that 35,000 human-specific mutations could be fixed in the human genome during that period? Because
35,000 single mutations is not a large number.
Yeah, but so you disagree with that paper which says...
No. I know exactly what you're talking about. That's accurate. That's true. Human-specific mutations are found all over the place, not just in brain function. There are many,
but what they are claiming is the waiting problem of the hominid population, and they say that it would take 84 million years to fix 2 mutations.
Well, that I don't. I'll have to look at that.
Hey, quick insertion here. So, sorry, are you on your computer or are you on your phone?
Me?
Yeah.
Computer.
Okay. Look in the private chat. Just I don't forget this. this paper that I linked there just came out. You will probably find it very interesting, especially in relation to your paper that we went over, because they have.
Oh yeah, I read this. I just saw that. It's fantastic, and I want to say one other thing. Speaking of that paper, John, on Aridopsis, I'm actually. I think I mentioned this to you when I was on your channel last week. I'm working on a paper on hypermutation, which is, I think somebody here on the panel mentioned the story of how organisms, do things with their genome. Well, one of the things organisms do, and by that I mean bacteria, is they can cause a sudden and rapid and very specific hypermutation, which allows them to survive against some toxic challenge, or, for example, a starvation, some stress response. And that is exactly what's being spoken about in this paper that John just linked. Plants do this all the time. There's a huge amount of the idea that the genome controls everything is going away. This is the Dawkins idea of the selfish gene centrism, because it turns out that organisms can control their genomes as much as the genomes control the organisms. And one way to do that is by this hypermutation and by directed mutation in specific locations, which is what this paper is about in plants. Fascinating paper. I read it with great pleasure. It's going to be one of the references I use when I finish my manuscript.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, when I was reading through that one, I was like, "Well, that's interesting." And I was thinking about, like, this got to have some applicability to fitness and fidelity and all those different aspects. And
that's right.
Well, I'm glad my connection between your paper and this one was correct.
Oh, wonderful! Yeah, absolutely. I was very excited to see it. I think it came out 2 weeks ago or something like that.
It was. Let's see. It was. Yeah, I want to say it was like the 15th, maybe, or something like that.
It was in Nature.
Very recent.
Very recent. Is that in Nature? Let me take a look.
Yes. It was in Nature. Yep.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, guys.
So, do you mind if I ask you
questions? But I gotta go.
Okay.
Yes, I just linked here in the private chat the paper. It's from John Sanford. If you can.
Yeah, I know that one. I know that one, Otangelo.
Okay.
We'll
talk about it another time.
Okay.
Like I said, guys, we gotta let Cy go, because he is it's 11:30 his time, and I'm serious. He's
not.
stuck.
I'm making sense. I can't even tell myself. So. This is way past. Okay. Good night,
Appreciate
everybody.
You have a good one.
Bye, Cy. Thanks
Good night.
for coming.
So I actually was wondering specifically on that topic, if let's just take the hypothetical cell, the first one that got started functioning properly. For it to start saving epigenetic information kind of makes no sense, unless the epigenetic information is so useful that the expenditure, let's say energy is not a problem, but material, if material is either super abundant, energy is super abundant, that saving just random junk is like really easy, then it's fine. There's no argument with that. But
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, I mean, because that brings up a problem. I understand when Dr. Gart said that, that there's all this energy, so it's not like, conserving the energy or shedding these things that are processes that require energy isn't a problem, because this energy is there. But on evolution, that all has to be explained also. How is it that that this energy system was evolved in a way that, in this process that ATP requires ATP, the process that makes ATP, it's complicated. And so now you're building this system that like overworks. It produces much more than it needs on evolution. And then it holds on to all of these things. And, and then when he talked about that these genes, orphan genes coming from these junk regions, I hope I'm not butchering what he said, but I believe that's what he said. He said in these junk regions you get these shuffling, and that's where these orphan genes are created. So does that mean that those aren't junk regions anymore? Because that's a function if there are genes coming from that region according to his model. But then I have another question, because I have an article here that talks about broken genes in humans. So how fast are these orphan genes being created, and are they being created faster than these genes that we're breaking? Because now you have like an entropy problem here with this also. So yeah, I just wanted to ask about 50 questions before I left. Maybe
Yeah, and then
time.
another question would be, so let's say the smallest amount of genes to make the cell functional. The more you add, the more it clogs up the genome, right? It becomes like, how much can it survive until it becomes unusable? Like, let's say you start 50% is unusable, that it's random junk. Well, the cell would not recognize that it's unusable, it'll just be in the cell, right? Well, how much can it fit until it becomes so jam-packed that it's unusable and just, becomes overworked or over packed, let's say that way. I don't know. Does that happen? Then it can't pass on all that stuff, because it's almost like, let's take a book, right? And in between each page, just shove in a bunch of random other pages from another book. I mean, how much can you shove in before you don't even recognize the book anymore?
Yeah, and I think size is a little bit more, has a more of a I guess unique position in that he's a theistic evolutionist. So he's not, although we would disagree, or at least I'll speak for myself, although I would disagree with the evolutionary process, I don't feel that's compatible with the biblical worldview. But that setting that aside, he's not rejecting the intelligent agent that can orchestrate these processes and make them happen, right? In the same way that Apple can build a really nice computer or a phone to do all of these processes and have a battery that has a bunch of battery life and all of these things that maybe we don't understand or we would disagree on. But from Sai's position, there is still an intelligent agent behind all of this that has orchestrated all of these things to work a certain way. Does that make sense? He's not purely on naturalism.
No, I understand that for sure. Yeah, he did say that he doesn't see the jump between, when humans came about. But let's actually a good example of, let's take a circuit board, right? A circuit board has function, so we can just kind of compare it to a cell that has function, right? So let's say we started adding a whole bunch of random parts into the circuit board from other circuit boards. After a while, those parts will start messing each other up. It'll be shorting out. It'll have like just random things will be going crazy with it, and eventually it'll just burn out the whole circuit board. And I'm thinking maybe the same problem would happen. How can so much epigenetic information be saved if it's completely useless? Like, I understand if it's useful. Let's say, somehow the genetic code of like making sure that the cell does not freeze below a certain temperature, that part gets saved because it's useful. If the temperature drops, it kind of like somehow, magic waving, and it uses that piece of code and makes itself survive. Then it becomes useful. But what happens if that so much junk piles up that it just becomes a mess of, contradiction, like it's trying to heat up and freeze and all this other stuff, whatever it's doing, and it's just gonna short circuit the genome.
Yeah, and that's where I would agree with that, and that's where I kind of think that there's a contradiction in that position that I would like. I'm sure he has an answer. I'm not, I don't think there's a gotcha, but from the Linsky's bacteria experiment, that's what we see. We see that these things are being lost. Even if there is what we will call a beneficial mutation, it's a beneficial mutation with a cost, even if it's slightly deleterious. But there is a cost, and you can't keep having a cost without a process to, to put. You can't keep removing walls to build a house, essentially. You can't keep removing parts off of something to make it better. At some point, you're going to run out of stuff to remove, and it seems like that's what we find with these studies. And I've got quite a bit. That Linsky's experiment, that's a great one. So on one hand, the evolutionary model is saying, well, we have all these mutations over time, and I didn't want to push back when he said, well, we can stop at Luca. Wait, no, we have to push that all the way back to that first life, whatever that might be. You're accumulating these mutations, from that first life, whatever, however simple or complex that first organism was, all the way up to that, aquatic different forms of life, to crawling out onto the dry land, all the way up to, to gaining those legs and gaining those hairs, and now you're a Luca, and then you have that one last magical mutation that poofs out a human. You've got millions and millions of years of deleterious mutation accumulation, even if they're slightly deleterious or nearly neutral, they'll say. We'll grant those beneficial ones, but then, we understand that there is a waiting time problem for these beneficial mutations to arise, and then you have to get them. They have to be in the same place at the same time, and they have to be reproductively compatible, and these error correction mechanisms can't wipe them out. And then they have to become fixed in a population, and then the rest of that population needs to die off. That's a stretch, and you got to do that for millions of years. Good luck.
Yeah. See, for me,
real quick, guys. So David Butler, come on in the stream, buddy. You talk so much trash on Facebook. You come in here talking trash. I see this didn't go well at all for Otangelo again.
Oh, I've seen that clown show on another YouTube channel too, talking smack.
So you're here, and so come on, man. The link is pinned at the top of the chat. Come on in. All you have to have is a phone, and you can hop on in here and explain to me and Otangelo why we're wrong and how the guys that we're making fun of are correct, and then back it up, bro. Come on in. It's amazing how these guys always talk so much trash and then never actually join. It's amazing. Or very, 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 very rarely will they back up their bullshit. Anyway, continue, guys.
So the thing I was wondering is, I wonder if there's even any theoretical ideas on how a cell might have evolved from a how can a cell gain information randomly? Like, let's say we take the cell as a functioning cell so far, and we just try to reverse engineer it. Is there any possible way this could have happened? I wonder if there's any studies on that, even theoretically, not like actually building the.
Yeah, so that's a good point too. If these genes are being created in these junk regions, then these junk regions aren't junk. But before you have this accumulation of what you're calling junk, how does the process work? Where'd you get all of that? Where'd you get all of that stuff from?
I was just reading like fish and spiders and all kinds of things had like a whole genome duplication in the past. Seems like that would give a lot of information, even if all beneficial mutations were deleterious. Seems like that would give a lot of information to work with. But I don't know. I'm just that's skimming articles recently. That's what I came up with.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about before, like, let's say before any kind of like complex, I'm talking about like the first cell. The only reason I'm talking about the first cell is because it'd be interesting to know if there's any even theoretical ideas on how this could have happened. Because like the more complex it is, the more we could miss. We can say that it's all junk DNA without realizing now we're like, now we see that, well, technically not all of it is junk. So maybe we're just missing the information where, we don't understand it quite good enough. But I'm talking about the Luca or whatever, the first theoretical one. Is there any even theoretical possibilities how the genome could? I know there was some studies done on, what's the minimum size of a functioning cell before the cell cannot work anymore. And I was wondering if there's any information on how that could have possibly happened. Because if there isn't, I mean, personally for me, I'm like, wait, wouldn't you think that's like a place to do your research? I'm not a biologist, and for me, biology is kind of muddy. But
yeah, I don't know about the first cell. I mean, how it came to be or anything. That's why I don't like to talk about abiogenesis. Nobody really gets anywhere when you talk about abiogenesis. Seems like. So I say maybe it formed naturally. Maybe a god did it. I don't know, and maybe we'll never know.
Yeah, but like.
Okay, so real quick. So David Butler is still being a little wuss inside chat. Claims it's 11 o'clock. It's too late for him. I guess he's a little man. It's past his bedtime. But he's claiming that the post on Facebook got deleted. Well, I didn't delete it. I didn't delete our interaction, and I posted it in like 6 or 7 different groups, which are still there. So if somebody deleted one of them, that was an admin, not me. It was still there. So he goes, I wasn't trying to join it. Had no intention of debating you yokels. Yeah, it's kind of ironic, David, that I was literally being able to make fun of MD Aware and Vino because they're the ones being the yokels and didn't even understand the basics of information communication theory, nor the level of astonishing misrepresentation of basically very basic concepts that are accepted in all of academia regarding biological systems. And I'm the yokel. That's always good. And Brody, by the way, the video wasn't deleted. This is the after show portion of it. So if you rewind, you'll find the part where we're going through that whole interaction that Otangelo had with MD Aware and Vino and explained why they didn't know what they were talking about. So this is the after show. I didn't delete anything. So it's okay, buddy. It's okay. Just calm down. We know that you're obviously one of those atheists who won't actually ever back up their BS and likes to spew a bunch of crap and not ever defend their own positions. That's okay, buddy. You keep telling yourself that you're that we're the yokels. That's a good one. Okay, continue, guys.
So Jackson, I know. I'm not talking about like the pre-cell whatever. I'm thinking like the first cell, the one that they call Luca, right? The ancestor, the first of everything, right? So if there's a way to even theoretically figure out, okay, if it started here, the next step would have to be this for it to start saving information or for it to build up any kind of resistance or even generate new information, like to become more complex cell. That's kind of the theoretical I was talking about. Because I know it's kind of like the Big Bang. People are saying that like, you can't see past that. We don't know how to see past that. Well, that's fine. We'll just leave that part alone. We'll just say, what's the next step that that it would take, at least theoretically.
Yeah, I don't know. It's above my pay grade. There are those 2 major gaps. Where did the universe come from, and where did life come from? And that's what keeps me from being a total atheist. I mean, I consider myself like an agnostic atheist. I'll say I don't think there is a God, but I'm not going to rule it out. And so that's really all I have to add to that.
Oh, yeah. So actually, since you're agnostic atheist, what is it called? I just had it.
That's an extremely uninformative description of your position, by the way.
What?
Well, when you say an atheist, atheism is a response to theism. So agnosticism would be the question that I don't know. So an agnostic atheist would be, I don't even know what I am.
Basically, yeah.
Hey, at least you're honest, right?
But I mean, why would you identify as anything at that point? Because you could title a rock, you could say a rock is an atheist by that definition. Doesn't have an opinion, or a banana, or just throwing that out there for you.
Does God exist? You've got yes, no, maybe, right? So God's existence is dichotomous. Either God does or does not exist. However, the answer doesn't have to be binary. I've gone through so many times. It can be affirmative yes, theism, affirmative no, atheism, or you've got all these other options, right? So why they try to come up with this like agnostic atheist thing is just ridiculous. And I'm not bashing you, Jackson, because it's something a lot of internet atheists try to do, but it's in academia, it's like considered stupid, just to be blunt. So none of those are yes or no affirmations, right? So you have to be something else. So
okay, third option. I'm agnostic deist. How about that?
Okay, I guess that could potentially work. You don't know. You think, well, yeah, I mean, I would say that would be okay. I don't know. I guess we can work with that.
Yeah. So, well, what about this? Do you consider figuring out if there is God an important question, or is it like well, it's theoretically interesting, but not specifically for me?
Well, if there is a God, I definitely want to know about it. Yeah.
All right. So would you consider, like, I know people that are agnostic, it's kind of thinking like, prayer is kind of like, I'm just talking to the wall. But would you consider as prayer as an option of searching? Because I know, like, I think John Lennox, he says it this way. He's like, you could find or think through the ideas and try to figure out, but then you'll never get to know God unless you experience him for yourself, right?
Yeah.
So I was.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just wondering if you ever tried, or if you ever decided to actually pray or reach out.
Well, I used to be Methodist, so I used to pray a lot, but I'm thinking more along the lines of if the James Webb Space Telescope sees far back and sees Yahweh spelled out in galaxies, I mean that would be pretty convincing, I think.
Well, concerning genetics, though, we find that we've got that binding agent that's shaped like a cross. We've got the biblical account written in your genetic code. The arguments that John makes for information. I mean, that's an intelligent process taking place right there in your own genome, your own personal genome. So, I mean, there's not much more. What can God do? He literally came down in the flesh.
So I have a little bit of a view on this, because I did listen to a guy. He said, if God wanted people that are free yet have a relationship with him, he has to hide himself. It's like the divine hiddenness problem, right? And it'll be the same thing as if a prince wanted to find himself a wife. He couldn't go out as a prince to go find himself a wife in his kingdom, because any person or any girl that would see him would instantly, not because they love the prince or as him as a person, but they would love to be in that position of the office, because they can become the queen or whatever. So that's kind of the same problem God would have if he would, let's say, reveal himself completely openly to creation. Because what will happen is that we would be overwhelmed with his glory. I think John said, I think in Revelations, how he fell on his face when he saw Jesus. And he said he felt like he was dead. And he did not get up until God picked, kind of strengthened him, let's say that way. Even though when Jesus was alive, he was the guy that was laying on his chest and, was really close to him. I think that's the same problem, or at least the same idea. I think that's why God did not make such a blatant, like on the moon written, believe in God, or, he leaves just enough hints for the people that are curious, or the people that are wanting to know, for them to seek him. And then it says that if you seek him, that he will open himself up to you. Of course, you have to actually seek him, because most of the time, like, we as humans, we want to know if God is real, but then we still want to be our own masters. Let's say that way. I don't know. That's my view on God's hiddenness.
Yeah, I think if there's a God, it would be like a deist God. I don't think it would necessarily be the one of the Bible. I mean, I don't mean to offend anybody with that. I know you guys all believe in that one, but I think it would be maybe just he created the universe, maybe he created life, maybe he didn't, maybe he just created the universe, and maybe he doesn't even know we exist. Maybe it's not even a he. Maybe it's an it. I mean, I don't know, but that's just my opinion on what God probably would look like.
Would you? Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, would you assume that God is not personal because of divine hiddenness, or just because if there is a beginning of, let's say, the Big Bang, right? There has to be a point. Let's say if God, I don't know what kind of time theory you hold to, but let's say there is, there has to be a I don't know if it's called time, but there has to be a logical moment when the universe began to exist. And if God created the universe, he would have to have made that first decision. So he would have to be, it can't be just a thing, because it would have to be then another cause that would cause the thing to cause the universe to become. So it has to be personal, right? So I'm wondering if you think God is a personal being, and then, and if you do, then the next step would be like, if he is a personal being, then it would make sense that he would want a relationship with his creatures. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it probably wouldn't be personal, but I mean, obviously I can't rule that out. No one can. But I mean, yeah, that's all I really have to add to that.
Do you think
we
that
could rule it out? We would rule it out. The Christian would rule that out.
Yeah, but do you think that argument of that it has to be a personal being, because if it's not a personal being, it would be acted on from another cause, and there has to be a first cause, so it has to be the only thing we know that can initiate a cause is a mind or that has volition.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but from the way I see it, we have a chicken and an egg problem no matter which way we look at it. If it's totally natural, where did the Big Bang come from? If there is a God, well, we're back to the same problem. Where did he come from? We can say he existed eternally, but we could say the same about the universe itself. I mean,
well,
the problem.
Go ahead. You probably gonna say the exact same as me. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you're gonna say about matter and energy, then I was gonna say the reason God can be eternal is because he's not physical, because we know that all matter and all energy that had a beginning of the big crunch or whatever you call it, the Big Bang. Everything was well, technically it was out of nothing. It sprung out. So the reason God could be eternal and the universe can't be eternal is because of they are different. So anything that has matter and energy will become, it will fall apart over time, entropy. But God has no entropy because of he's not made out of material. He's just a mind. Anyway, that's kind of a difference. I don't know if you were going to say the same thing or not.
Yeah, John, what do you have to say?
Well, I would agree with what Slavic just said. I would also say that in the context of like the universe, if we were still in the steady state theory and all that kind of stuff of an eternal universe, then you'd be correct, except that that's not what you have to account for.
Yeah, I mean, like when the Big Bang was a singularity, technically was that eternal because space-time didn't technically exist yet before.
Right, but at the singularity, you still have to account for the cause.
Yeah. Right, it's a very strange problem.
So a singularity doesn't give you an escape mechanism, because you still have to. There still has to be a starting point and a cause for the starting point.
I'm not saying it's an escape mechanism. I'm saying that something could have started. I mean, if something obviously started.
Well, no, I'm saying like if you want to claim that the singularity could be eternal, then why did it not stay eternal? You have to account for what caused it to spring from the universe to come from the singularity. Is the whole point. And I think you might want to. I think you might want to look into cosmology as well, because like when you go down the rabbit hole of that, you run into all sorts of stuff. But the expansion, I was drawing blank on the term.
Fine tuning. The fine tuning of the universe, yeah.
Well, there's all the fine tuning aspects of it, but even with some of the theories of like, oh well, this is just a bubble universe, and we're just one of many that's popping off from all this stuff. Eventually, you go back down to the root problem of, okay, what was the universe? Where did the universe generator come from? Right. So you could apply this to, well, where did God come from? You can make that same point. However, you are not accounting for all the other variables, right? As well as you're still trying to apply the laws of the physical universe, like physical existence, to the equation, when which is not being done in relation to the existence of God, which was the point that Slavic was making, right? Yeah. So all those theories of cosmology, they still end up running into the same problem. I mean, all I gotta say is, like, when you think about some of the theories that are out there, like you basically have like perpetual motion machine universe in a couple of them. You have it's expand and contract, and it's like, well, the energy like somehow reforms itself into a usable state so that you have the next one happen. I mean, there's like so many different aspects of it, and then they all ultimately run back into the problem of accounting for the universal wave function that has to embody all the aspects of the universe. And that universal wave function also has to account for all the fine tuning of the universe. So you get back to this whole thing of like, okay, so ultimately I have to come up with a universal wave function that accounts for every aspect of existence, and that has to have formed itself with no external intelligent agent. Like, that's what you run into. And if you want to come to the conclusion that can create itself, then so be it. Or you're faced with, or it makes more sense that there must be a preceding intelligent agent. And this is where the diatribes I go on about in relation to, like, even if we're in like a simulated universe, even if the creator of this universe is itself inside of another universe, it still doesn't remove the obvious conclusions that a intelligent agent is the more rational conclusion, based on all the cumulative evidence of the necessities for the universe to exist itself, and then all the subcomponents of the universe to exist, all trend towards in my opinion, the necessity of that preceding intelligent agent, even if it's in some external universe and operates under different laws of physics and time, and operates in some other plane, all that kind of. Even if that is true, it doesn't change what would be necessary for our existence, and that's the point.
Yeah, I kind of have a pet theory about where the universe came from. Of course, I'm not a physicist. Can't say the word, so obviously I'm not one. But I think the universe came from a black hole, basically. You know, the singularities are in every black hole. Maybe when each black hole forms, it's popping in a new universe. I'm not explaining it very well, but that's what I think could be possible.
So, would you say that you are like a naturalist? Like there is nothing supernatural? Would you agree with that statement?
I think probably not. There's probably nothing supernatural, but again, I'm not going to rule it out 100%.
Okay, so if there was a way to prove that there is things that are supernatural, would that get you to believe that there is a God, or if that it's more likely or mostly likely?
Yeah, if that happened, yeah, I would accept that there was a God. But
okay, so
I think it'd probably be hard to prove which one it was when they're
yeah, so we'll getting to the which one it is. I can address that a little bit later. But let's say this way: there's a really good way of actually proving that there is a supernatural element to the universe. I don't know if you ever looked into near-death experiences, and not just near-death experiences they saw heaven or whatever, but like the ones that they can collaborate with things that they saw on, let's say tennis shoe on the top of the roof, or a sticker above or when they drained that lady's blood out of her mind because they were doing out of her brain because they were doing a surgery on her brain, and then she saw the operation, she saw like the environment, heard the doctor speak and everything. I think that is a way to get to see that there's more than just the physical universe.
Maybe, but
now
the thing I've read about near-death experiences is they vary from religion to religion.
Oh yeah,
like
of
Muslims
course.
will see Muhammad and things like that.
Yeah, but see, I'm not gonna dispute the religion part. I'm just saying that we'll just take one step at a time, right?
Yeah.
If supernatural, there's something there. Let's say that way. There's enough evidence that there's enough smoke. There must be fire. So now we'll take the next step. I think the next step is the best way to step into Christianity, or even believing in God, is the moral argument. I think there is good and evil. Therefore, we all strive for justice. We all want to see justice. I think that is a good way to step one step closer to believing in God. Because
Could be.
and then the historical argument, just pointing out that Jesus is a historical figure, that his disciples seen him risen after death. That's another step. Let's say that way. I think that's another way to get closer, because Paul says it this way: if the resurrection never happened, then we are the most miserable people. There's no hope. So I think that's like the next step forward. And then I think the other step would be experiencing God through personal, because to be honest, I've been a Christian pretty much all my life. I can't say all my life, but I could say pretty much all my life. And I would say this way, that most people, they, counting me, we look for not like intellectual proof, but like I have to feel that it's true.
Yeah.
And so I think, without that actual experience of God, it would be very difficult for somebody to follow God, let's say that way.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with anyone's personal experiences. I mean, if you feel you felt God, I'm not going to tell you haven't,
Yeah, but I'm just saying that the cumulative case, for that the universe is has designed, that that the universe is set up for life, the cosmological arguments, and then the near-death experiences pointing to something supernatural. Like, let's say this way: I'm from Ukraine, which the people there are a lot more open to spiritual stuff, let's say that way. I grew up here, but I still kind of understand their mindsets, and it's not that they just make up that there are some kind of ghosts. It's that it's a reality they live with. In the West, it's very, very, like, almost rarely you see it. But when you go to the old country over there, and you see that people live with witchcraft and demons, that you can, let's say, you can not just, if you wanted to, you could probably go and videotape them, and then people would think it's CGI. Like, they would, things flying around the houses and kind of weird stuff like that. And people think it's normal. It's not like they think, why is it the physics or gravity breaking? They live with that kind of reality. In the West, it's very hard for us to kind of put our minds around it, because we have grew up in this, the material is all there is. What I'm saying is that, there's more than just the natural, but because we close ourselves off to it. We kind of ignore things that happen that does not fit into our paradigm. So what I'm saying is that there is evidence for supernatural. I think that's that's a step forward. And then the historical narrative of the Bible, and the reliability of the transmission of the Bible, the reliability, or at least, that it was written before 70 years passed from the, and then another thing is, I recently was listening to, I forget who he was. He's my mind just blanked on his name, but he's pretty popular, and he's saying that Jesus was the only person that changed human history so much. If he was nobody, just a farmer from, or a peasant from the Middle East, then it doesn't make sense how his life was such an impact. I know most atheists would say that, well, why wouldn't God come right now that we can have video evidence and everything? But it makes sense. If you look at the impact of what Jesus' life did on earth, it makes sense why he came back then, because so many people became Christian because of him coming in that time, not right now, if that makes sense. I know it's not
well, also in line with your point there, that whole like dismiss that the point you just mentioned about like we hear atheists requesting now like God to come on video. It's like, okay, at the time, the estimated entire population of the freaking planet was about 300 million people. A gigantic percentage of that was underneath the Roman Empire at the time, or easily accessible via the Roman Empire at the time. So all the things you're talking about, the expansion, the influence, the impact, et cetera, happened about as optimal as it could have been, especially given the fact that within a very short period of time, it had spread across the majority of the planet at that point, right? Outside of the North and South America, it was spreading everywhere, right? And so it's like, what do you want? Like the other part that really pisses me off. If God was if God was a real God, he wouldn't rely on prophets and books. He would speak for himself. And it's like, he sent Jesus Christ to come to earth and to speak for him. Like, it's right there, to be a God made man and in the flesh and dwelt among us. Like, I don't know where you're wanting. You're claiming that Christ didn't exist, but if God exists, then he would have come. The man came claiming to be God, rose from the dead. Oh, well, that didn't happen. It's like all this dismissal. It's like you can't have your cake and eat it too, folks. You can either accept that God exists and that God came and wants us to be saved, or you can reject it. That's your choice. Like, but you can't argue that there was never an argument made nor evidence presented by God himself. Like, you'll stand before that's where the whole aspect of standing before the judgment seat of Christ, and it's like, the great white throne, and be like, well, I didn't know that you existed. It's like, well, you had debates and conversations about it all the time. Like,
yeah,
you rejected.
And I think another important thing to say is if the atheists, when they make that argument of, well, if he came now and it was on video, then we would believe, but they wouldn't. They would be like, no, it's CGI or it's some kind of camera trick or whatever. You know how that's the nature of humans. And the reason is we have this kind of nature is not that, I think Christopher Dawkins maybe said it, or Hitchens maybe, he said that I don't want a cosmic dictator. That's the problem, is that most of us, we want to make our own rules. And I think that's what happens with everybody, is that we want to make, I don't want somebody telling me how to live. Especially in the West, we have this mindset of this, like this individualism that, I am a sovereign person. You can't violate my rights, without realizing that, like, most people that live right now on planet Earth, if God came right now and it was on videotape and everything, it still wouldn't permeate society as much as if Jesus came right when the Roman roads were all, ready for the travel of information. Another thing is that
interrupt quick because I'm leaving.
Go ahead.
So, John, thanks for having me on your stream.
Oh, of course, James. I appreciate you joining me. And so I've been texting somebody, right? I didn't see your stuff about David Butler. So what's David doing? He's talking trash as usual. Okay, let's see what he's got here. Oh, okay. So this is interesting. Otangelo has a very long history of bad behavior that I have zero problem standing by that statement. So it's on. Okay, so David, I have been around Otangelo quite a bit, and if he has bad behavior, calling in and making arguments that get interrupted, cut off, told are invalid by individuals who don't know what the freaking argument is, nor understand the baseline principles that are being discussed, and then claim that he's making things up or being out to lunch. That just is indicative of the fact that the average internet atheist is a freaking lying moronic fool who doesn't know what the hell they're talking about and suffers from the atheist fantasyland projection complex, along with the atheist hyperliteralist disorder and ALMS, which is the atheist little man syndrome. And given the fact that, David, you've been in here now for like a solid 45 minutes talking trash in side chat while simultaneously claiming that you can't join the stream to back up your bullshit. I think that obviously you are suffering specifically from AFLPC and from alms, because you clearly don't have the wherewithal to just hop on with your phone, because that's all you have to have. I told you that a while ago. You just need to come in and back up your bullshit. That's it.
Yeah,
Or
and he says here, again, my only goal is to ridicule you, Otangelo.
Well, that's the usual.
He's a joker. I saw him on some. He commented on some Dr. Jason Lyle video, saying a bunch of rhetoric, and when I called him out on it, he had no response. This is the same stuff, different day.
Well,
Yeah,
I would put him, but it's up
sorry.
to you. So have a good one. See you next time. Bye-bye, guys.
You too, brother. Have a good night.
My God bless.
I mean, I even respect Ken Hovind. I mean, most atheists hate Ken Hovind, and you know, it's a weird position, but I respect everybody. I'm not gonna talk trash about someone in the comments and then not show my face on video.
Hey, hopefully, I'm not like trying to pressure you or anything. I'm bringing up the ideas that I see persuasive. Let's say that way. So hopefully, I don't know, take it or leave it. But that's my my view on that whole.
Yeah, I respect that opinion. What were you gonna say, John?
Oh, I'm chuckling at the side chat. David's claiming he can't. I guess he can't go outside. Maybe he says people are sleeping nearby, but I guess maybe he's actually, his icon, which shows a grown man. Maybe he's actually a teenage boy pretending to be a grown man and like can't walk outside of his own house or apartment. I don't know. Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. It's always amazing. Now, if he's at work, okay, fair enough. But if you're like just at home and your like wife or girlfriend is sleeping, I mean, like, dude, step up, walk out, unless she's got your balls in like a lockdown, like one of those like sadist masochist, ball clamps or something. You can't walk away. I don't know what's going on with you, but come on, bro, man up. You've been talking trash for an hour and a half, or like over an hour, and you talked a bunch of trash to me on Facebook. So step up, bro. Anyway, but no, Jackson, I have to admit that you are of the, not all, but I mean the majority of the atheists I've dealt with on YouTube. You've been, well, actually, you're agnostic deist. You're much more straightforward and reasonable, even if you disagree.
Yeah.
So I don't think that you're necessarily defined as much by your whatever you are. Versus other folks who even though the majority of them deny it, it's obvious that their sense of self is predicated on atheism being true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what the truth is. I'm always looking for it. So
yep. So, okay, here it is. David is he's in bed next to his wife. Yep, she's got him on lockdown. Not allowed to get out of bed after 11 o'clock, I guess. Even though he was at 10:30, he was talking about it's almost 11, and he can't do anything. It's amazing, man. It's amazing. I've never been in a relationship where I couldn't get out of bed and back up my crap for a couple minutes.
I suck at relationships.
What do you say?
I suck at relationships. Longest one I had was like 3 months.
Yeah, relationships are weird, man.
Yeah.
It's Slavic, you're married, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm married.
And I
would say I actually found a good video for a relationship. Oh, I forget the guy's name is. They did a study on relationships for like 20 years of different couples and which one survived and which one didn't and what was the difference between them. And they said most of them, the biggest difference was when they argued, the ones that survived, they did 5-1. So they did 5 positive for 1 negative. So like, let's say an example would be like, what he brought up an example about something about like, you're not giving me enough attention, right? Instead of saying, hey, you're not giving me a dad. I feel like you're just not a good communicator. They'd be like, look, I feel like I need more of you. I'm missing you. I want you, and I feel like I'm not getting enough of you. So they would turn it into a positive, even though it's a negative. Anyway, I don't know. That's what I heard. That was pretty interesting talk. If anything, I can send a link or something. It's pretty interesting.
No, you're right about it. Like Sam's married as well. Sam, you've been married for at least like 20-something years now, right?
No, 27? Dang, dude.
No, I said 20-something.
Yeah, well, I've been married for about 16 years, but I've been together with my wife for 20, yeah. Over 20, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew it was somewhere around there. Yeah, that's
find a girl that'll stick with me for very long.
Well, my parents are celebrating this year will be 55 years they've been married, which is crazy when you think about it. Got married at 19 and 20. Been together since. Been through a bunch of stuff together. My dad went to Vietnam, got shot. My mom stayed with him, helped him recover from all that.
How old are you, John?
Me, I'm 37.
37? I thought you were younger than that.
Nope, 37.
Yeah, I'm 28.
28. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so you were the let's see. I was your age when I almost died. Had my brain surgery.
Oh, really?
Yep.
What kind of brain surgery? Kind of.
I had a
or something?
no. I had a cavernous malformation that exploded. I had a massive hemorrhage. Should have died. Had emergency surgery. I'm walking, talking miracle according to neurologists and neurosurgeons, and it's an interesting paradigm shift in my life. I was a pretty successful entrepreneur at the time, and rocking and rolling. Anyway, long story short, the all that stuff kind of put me on a different path and sent me down the rabbit hole of diving into all this stuff that we talk about. And I was searching for my own explanation for my existence. And I also was operating directly from the position that if it was the logical, plausible, and probable conclusion that a God existed, I wanted to know, and I wanted to be able to back it up, and I wanted to have a rational conclusion to why that is so. And if that was not the case, and I didn't find anything that would lead me down that path, then I would answer that question as well, and then, determine what I want to do with my life. And the deeper I went, the more, to me, it seems completely irrational, regardless of evolution being true, false, whatever. Like when you look at everything from a cumulative perspective, it is not rational to conclude there is no God, in my opinion. We look at it in the big picture, and when we're young, it's easy to have our sense of immortality, as well as to think that, oh, well, this stuff isn't that important, or I don't need to consider this angle and that angle and all these different things, and we just kind of brush things aside in our youth. And then, in my case, I was forced to recognize it all, or start to analyze it, just from having my sense of immortality stripped away. But from the bigger picture, it's like, I'm not really sure, other than ultimately a root of immaturity, or a desire to maintain the juvenile mental state of immortality, and not actually having to truly address the transcendental aspects of our existence. Like, if you won't, I think a lot of atheists just won't go down that rabbit hole, and it kind of justifies. Well, I'm not saying it's about you. I'm saying it justifies a lot of the very, very immature, supposedly grown-ass men and women that I interact with on YouTube. Many of which are older than me, but their mental state, their actions, and their activities are extraordinarily juvenile. And it's like, last sentence, it's like, okay, so you're literally fulfilling what I'm talking about while claiming I'm the one who's making crap up and living in like a fantasy land of, cognitive dissonance and such. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I've faced mortality in a different way. See, several years ago, I was severely depressed, like beyond what we would ever imagine, depression. And I was going to go out into the woods with a pistol and shoot myself in the head, basically. I know it's a dark story, but bear with me. and I was still an atheist at the time, and I thought this is going to be the end, and I'm never going to see another moment again, and that's how it's going to end. Luckily, that didn't happen, but I'm just saying I've stared down the barrel, so to speak, and still held on to the thought that there is no God. Kind of a dark story, but
no, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, we've all, I mean, many of us have gone through not necessarily all scenarios like what you're talking about, but I mean, there's all those, we've all had those moments of, well, especially as you get older, right? With people, everybody your age might not have, but I mean, as we get older, everybody is at some point faced something about it. It's like an aspect of humanity, right? Where at some point we have to address the fact that whether it be our own choice or otherwise, at some point, this our existence on this plane is going to cease. Yeah. And what does that mean? And what's the underlying elements to all that, and the principles and the concepts and the, like I said, the word I used earlier, like the transcendental aspect, concepts that have to be addressed. And I think this is for me, it's like where when you really look at again things from the big picture, right? Of this is why I kind of alluded to you in relation to like you on evolutioning in the context of mostly being focused on the fossil record and such, right? Yeah. And one of the analogies I like to use is like a mosaic, right? And it's like, okay, if you were looking at a mosaic and you only looked at like 2 of the squares that make up the mosaic, and then we're like, well, I don't see how what you're claiming this big picture is. Doesn't make any sense, right? And if you're only looking at 2 of the stones, well, of course you don't know what the big picture is, right? Like that would be, how could you at that point, right? And yeah, you kind of take that step back and then look at all the different things. That's why I say in the context of like, okay, does cosmology necessarily by itself? Maybe, maybe not, depending on where you go with it, right? The fine-tuning aspects of the cosmology, well, okay, you're getting a little bit further. Okay, then what about the biological fine-tuning and all those components to it? What about the information problem? What about, and you like start going down all the different steps, right? If you stopped at, oh, well, I think evolution is true, therefore. I'm not saying you, I'm just saying in general, right? Oh, evolution is true, therefore there's no God, right? Or no necessity for God, or no reasonable conclusion that there is a God. Same thing. Well, you know, the universe is fine-tuned, all that kind of stuff, but, you know, there could be a multiverse, therefore I'm just going to dismiss God, right? If you just look at them individually, it's like going back to make some metaphors here, in a court of law, right? If this one piece of circumstantial evidence, if you as a juror said, well, this piece of circumstantial evidence that you guys submitted doesn't prove beyond all reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty, and then you say, but I at the same time I'm not going to consider the other 99 pieces of evidence that were presented, because by itself this one circumstantial piece didn't prove the case, right? The other jurors in the jury pool will be looking at that person like, what? Like, that's not being, you're not being rational, right? But then the reciprocal, if you look at it from the reciprocal, right? It's like the 99, yeah, correct. This one piece, I'm not sure, it doesn't prove. However, there's 99 pieces of evidence that would be indicative of this being the rational conclusion. Now, it's still within the realm of possibility you could be wrong, but it doesn't mean that it's not the more reasonable conclusion that in this context, the person is guilty or innocent, whichever way you're going with it, right? So I apply the same logic to the existence of God, right? It doesn't have to just be this purely faith-based, experiential conclusion that God exists. You can look at it from the cumulative perspective. And then if that is the case, if you then conclude that it is more rational to conclude that God exists, then you can start and this is what I'm saying doesn't apply to everybody, then you can start the search for, okay, which one of the gods, quote unquote, is the correct one. And very often people try to do the reciprocal, and some people it works for them, and other people it doesn't. It kind of turns them off from the search, right? But to me, it's like when I look at the overall case, it's like, to me, it is irrational to conclude that God does not exist. You have to have some kind of defense mechanism in place to ignore the obvious from the evidence perspective, or you don't have enough of the evidence to analyze. And this goes back, my long-winded diatribe will be over here. This kind of goes back to a lot of the scientists that are atheists, right? In the modern era, the vast majority of scientists are like hardcore, hyper-specialized, right? They are staring only at this one stone in the mosaic, right? That is the reality of modern academia. The vast majority of them are not looking at the big picture. They just acquiesce to, oh, well, my peers must have figured this out already, right? Well, now the irony is that their peers are very often also just as hyper-focused as they are in a different field, right? And they're all like conceding back and forth to each other. The other guys must have figured this out already. But then when you actually go down the rabbit hole, you find out that they haven't. Or it's just like hypotheticals, or it's all these like hypotheses that haven't actually been proven, or proven from a scientific, not like mathematically, but evidentiary perspective. They're not nearly as concrete as they try to claim they are. And anyway, my long-winded diatribe is go and I would say search on the much bigger scale. And if it takes you 10 years, so be it. But like just keep looking and don't just operate and think that all this is solved. Because I'm telling you, if you go look, you're going to find that it's quicksand a lot of these guys are standing on with their extreme confidence. Enough of my diatribe.
Yeah. This is kind of unrelated. Did you see the last debate I had with Hohen?
The
Hawaiian
most
shirts.
recent one, yes. I saw bits and pieces of it, yes.
Yeah. There was the last, not the one where I was wearing the Hawaiian shirt. That was a funny one, but the what was it about? Transitional fossils. From his perspective, he really couldn't empathize with the concept of there being transitional fossils. So really, it was just kind of a waste of time. I felt like we were just butting heads for an hour and a half with no one really making any headway, but it was still entertaining. What were your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, to be honest, man, the whole transitional fossils argument, I think, is a non-starter in terms of actually defending your position. Because I could, and I'm going to, for all the freaking Evo atheists in the side chat who are not going to grasp the point that I'm making, just put on your earmuffs because you're not going to grasp the concept. From a possibility of what could be perceived as totally different things, right? We know from direct observation, not inference, that inside of a species there can be dramatic potential for significant variation in morphology, right? We know this beyond doubt. And I always like to use the example of, and again, remove the fact that we know that all dog breeds are inside of the freaking dog, the canid family, right? Ignore that, remove that from the equation, okay? Think about it from a fossil perspective. If you came across a Great Dane skull, a bulldog skull, and a greyhound, right? And all you had was a skull. The shape differences, if you just looked at them next to each other, you might say that, okay, there might be some relation, yada, yada, yada. But you wouldn't, just if all you had was the freaking skull. There's such dramatic variations. I would argue that paleontologists would probably argue they were completely different species.
Yeah, they would probably say they were different species, but they would definitely say they were related based probably on their teeth and other similarities.
Right. I agree. But you would say, but then let's look at it from a size perspective. Okay. Let's say you have a Chihuahua skeleton and a Labrador and a Irish Wolfhound. Okay. You're talking about astonishingly different size, right? So what's one of the factors that are put in relation to, say, the primate to human stuff, right? Well, we've got things that were 3 feet tall. Lucy was 3 feet something or whatever. I think they suggest. You know this data more than I do.
Well,
but
there was a male that was 5 feet tall.
Okay, 5 feet tall. Okay.
Yeah.
My point is that you could potentially extrapolate out the same point that I'm making here, right? In terms of size it's related, size variation, all that kind of stuff. But we know from observation that all of that variability could be inside of one subset, right? So the variations in size and like stance and slight variations in morphology don't actually prove. I'm talking from a fossil perspective. Even if you find them, don't actually prove in any way, shape, form, or fashion that this is evidence for evolution in the context that you're taking it, right? is the point I'm making. Is you can easily look at it from the other angle and be like, well, so there's a lot of plasticity in this. So what's your point? Like, I know this already. That doesn't have, but nobody's going to argue that the plasticity in the skeletal shape and skull structure, all that kind of stuff of inside of dog breeds is evolution in the sense that we're talking about, right? Even though if all you had available to you was the skeletons in the fossil form, you wouldn't actually be able to know one way or the other, right? You follow me?
Yeah, I follow.
So anyway, that's my long way of saying, like, okay, I mean, you can infer that the conclusions that are reached by the evolutionary biologist camp and the paleontologists, you can infer that might be the correct one, but that doesn't mean that it's actually proof of the model overall. And which same thing applies in relation to, this is why I always argue about, you have to look at this from the genetic perspective, right? And it's like, oh, okay, cool, there's like similarities and all this kind of stuff, but so what's your point? There's similarities in all sorts of computer systems too. And the code base could be hyper, if you're using and me and Slavic talked about this before, you can have a framework that you're building an application on. And that means that a gigantic percentage of the similar functions that are going to be used across different applications, the code could be either 100% the same or very, very, very similar. And then you would have like small portions of the overall code, right, that's making up this entire program, could be variable, but then there'd be all this other stuff to be almost the exact same. And sorry, go ahead.
There's another dimension to it that if you look at through history, the fossils that were found as like Lucy and all the other ones, a lot of them were frauds because
a few of them.
People, yeah, because they were looking for, they were trying to, it's not like they were like, oh, wow, we found this and now we've got to figure out where it fits. They were purposely going out to find what they wanted. So that's another dimension that adds to it. It's like, you got to be more careful.
But most of the time, the frauds were not pulled off by the people who actually found them, or like Archaeoraptor is a good example. Some peasant basically glued together two fossils and sold it. And they thought it was real for a while until they did a CT scan and realized, wait a minute, this is just two separate things. Same with Piltdown Man. They're not sure who faked Piltdown Man, but they figured that out with I think fluorine dating, that the bones weren't the right age. They didn't match, so they discovered that wasn't legitimate.
Yeah,
Nebraska Man too, right? Was it Nebraska Man?
Yeah, that one was an honest mistake. Some guy found a tooth, thought it was a hominid. Turns out it wasn't.
No, it was a tooth. It was a single tooth.
Single tooth.
I mean, that's a wild imagine. I mean, they could have created anything around a single tooth.
Well, and I think the other thing that has to be really considered too, and this goes back from both the end outcomes of the skeletons and everything, but as well as from a genetic perspective. If we think, because of my background, to me, this makes so much sense, and I just don't understand how people have a hard time grasping this. But like, I can have in the modern era and technology, like in software and stuff, where we have like the whole aspect of templates, the concept of a template. Like, you can, again, I've used this many times. You can go on Envato or Theme Forest, all these kind of places, and you can get you can buy a WordPress theme, right? And that WordPress theme could have 15 different variations inside of this one zip folder that you download, right? You install it on the content management system of WordPress, and then you can from there select which theme you want to go with. You can still have the other one sitting in the background, and they're available to you. They're just not activated. Same thing with plugins. You can have all these plugins installed. You might even have them activated. You just don't have them implemented anywhere on your website, right? Doesn't mean it's not there. It's just not active right now because you don't need it at that given moment. Now, as your business grows or you have a new thing that you want to have happen, you might log in and turn it on and say, hey, I want to have X, Y, and Z available on these pages on my website and it's going to be this function. Now, that function had to be pre-existing. Now, in the context of if you're coming this from a cascading down perspective, right? If you have those things front loaded on the front end, which you do, apply the same logic to animals, right? Like, if you have a front-loaded genome, then just like you would do in the context I just described, you could have in this iteration of it, this recombination effect that takes place, this is the template that is activated. In this particular climate, this is the function that gets turned on. This plugin gets activated, right? It gets implemented. Like, all those kind of things from a modern technology perspective are not that outlandish, because we do it all the freaking time in any kind of drag and drop web application or mobile app you ever used. Like, you can reorganize all sorts of pre-existing functionality and activate it. The code had to be pre-existing. That just didn't have to be turned on. Same thing with some of the stuff we're starting to get now with, this isn't quite applicable, but it's kind of analogous. Like, I remember when HTML5 and CSS3 came out, and that's what really enabled what we now currently enjoy with like mobile responsiveness. Back in the day, like when you were in high school, you used to have like a m.domainname.com, right? And there was like a completely separate version of websites that was like usually pared down and like simplified. And it was like the mobile version, because you had to have a completely different CSS and style sheets and all that kind of stuff specifically for that mobile version to account for like the retina display, or the dimensions of a mobile device and stuff. Then when HTML5 and CSS3 came out, you were able to create things. It's the same website. It resizes and expands on the fly. You can have provisions that like turn off this module if it's on this size, if it's on a phone of this dimension versus an iPad versus a laptop versus a desktop screen. You can have all those different variables accounted for, right? You still have to have the code pre-written, but you can have it operate on the fly based on their real-time necessities. And so anyway, my long-winded diatribe here is like, that's exactly what I'm describing is exactly what we're observing. And even if it's these hypermutation concept we're talking about, or turn on, turn off of genes based on environmental pressures, all that kind of stuff in real time, like that's exactly what we're observing. And it's one of the reasons I get so frustrated with even talking with like evolutionary biologists, like actual like PhDs and stuff, is most of them, what I'm describing, it seems to go completely over their head. And even though, and Slavic as a dev can attest to this, everything I'm talking about is 100% true. And we do it, and I'm sure he's written exactly what I'm talking about in different instances. He's had to write the code to account for the things I'm discussing. Is that fair, Slavic?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm probably gonna get off pretty soon because I gotta go back to work tomorrow early morning. So it was fun. I really enjoyed the conversations. Jackson, you were a pleasure to talk to.
Nice talking to you.
Appreciate you, man. As always. You have a good night.
Yep.
Anyway, so I've been rambling. So I've been rambling for a while. I'll let you guys talk for a minute before we wrap up. No, but I guess the question to you, Jackson, is what I just said, did that make sense to you?
I'm starting to fade out. I'm getting kind of ill from this COVID I had.
Well, go take your vitamin C, D, and get some zinc, and eat a couple. Hey, by the way, apples have the additional component you need, and elderberry has the additional component you need to get that zinc into your cells.
And you got to get enough sleep too.
Yeah. Yep. I slept all day, so.
Yeah, they say that people that have had COVID, they start losing their hair like a month or two after, and they're attributing that to the zinc deficiency. Somehow the COVID strips your body of the zinc, and so it'll cause you to start losing hair. Then. Yeah, that's what they're finding now.
Well, because zinc has a big part in your immune response. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna get off. It was nice talking to you guys.
All right. Good night, man. Nice to talk to you too.
Sam, you got any? We'll wrap up. I think we'll wrap up on this. You got any last words, Sam?
No. Just have a good night. Repent.
Appreciate it.
And also look forward to David the Clown Show coming into one of these things.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping he would come in. Be a nice dumpster fire.
Well, I think it's obvious that guy doesn't ever join.
Yeah. Talks a big game, though.
They all do. It really is fascinating how many of them talk the game and never back it up. I tell you what will be very interesting. It will be interesting to see if MD Aware and Vino actually do step up for a debate. That would be interesting.
That would be cool.
Probably not. They probably won't, just because of if they don't control the mute button. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in the email that they sent, they did talk about, where, what platform, all that kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting to see, to the point you just made, when it's like, because I don't care, man, as long as it's not, they don't get to control the mic. We can do it on an SFT's channel. I'll do it on Modern Day Debate. Like, there's plenty of places I'm happy to go to. It's just I'm not going to let you control the mute button. I mean, this is basic stuff. We're going to make arguments, and you have to back up your crap,
Yeah. Alrighty, well, I'm gonna head out. So it was nice talking to you guys again. It's been a bit.
Have a great night. Yeah,
Hey, man, have a good night.
Get back into it. Have a good night, man.
I'm going to cut out too, John. Glad that you decided to have a show tonight. I was getting bored. Looking forward to an LPP after show.
Well, I think there's a debate coming up on like the 26th. I think I may do an after show for. I think that actually is that another round between. No, that's yeah. I think the 26th is another round between Jackson and Hovind again. I think.
Jeez.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
he's going for it, huh?
I guess it'll be an interesting one. We'll see if they survive. But all right, everybody, I appreciate everyone who has stuck it out through this and hung out with us for 3 hours and 24 minutes. I appreciate it very much, and I hope you enjoyed both the after show as well as our initial review of the Truth Needed. I'm rebranding them to Truth Needed from Truth Wanted. Conversation that Tangela had with them. Hope you enjoyed all that and found what we talked about to be substantive and actually making a point rather than just dismissing the obvious. But as I always love to say, and this can go straight out to David if he's still with us, I strongly recommend you actually go down the rabbit hole, go research for yourself whether the points that are made are true or false. But in the most important sense, as you contemplate the substance of your existence, the ultimate transcendent factors that would be the most rational in the conclusion of how you exist, make sure that whatever ultimate conclusion you make, that it is logical, plausible, and probable. Have a good night, everybody.